Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our State of the Union live stream with the dream team that we have assembled here. What do we have today, Krystal?
Indeed, we have a great program for you this evening. All right, so as you guys know, the president is preparing to give his annual State of the Union address to Congress. Few things that are different this year. I mean, the big thing is that we have Kevin McCarthy now in as Speaker of the House, so visually he'll be there instead of Nancy Pelosi. Signal of the fact that it is a different time in Washington, and frankly, all of the things that he's going to lay out that he would theoretically want to get done are obviously not going to get done because of that reality. But we're going to take a look at some things we have pulled for you about the actual state of the economy in particular, because he's going to lead a lot into that, and also the political landscape, because in a lot of ways, this is kind of his launch for his reelection. He's not going to officially launch till March or April, but this is the beginning of Joe Biden making the case for what he's done, what he wants to do going forward, and also, you know, what he thinks needs to be pushed back on for the Republicans. So we are joined by the wonderful Marshall and the wonderful Kyle. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey, me and Marshall did not plan our outfits to look as similar as they did. I agree. I think we look good.
I think watchers are breaking points will notice that Kyle has been really stepping up since that first episode. You're morphing into Saagar, and I'm looking forward to the tie next time.
Yeah, I was going to say, what happened to the ties, gentlemen?
What was the first episode?
Yeah, what was I wearing? Pajamas?
When we unveiled the first breaking points, like live recording back in 2021. So look, I think there's something we could all do and learn from each other.
Oh, wow.
I was probably wearing like pajamas, pants or something.
I mean,
he's like, why is Pikachu on your pants?
I don't want to give away the game here, but he is wearing sweatpants and slippers right now, so.
Hey, listen, don't blow my spot up. This is the one time the sweatpants actually match the jacket, and here you are, raining on everybody's parade.
Be careful, Kyle, because on our set, you can actually see the upper links of your thighs.
True, but
just
looks good.
Just trying to be transparent.
That's all right.
Just trying to be transparent.
He's being true to form.
I didn't want people to think I'd changed you. You know, you're still the same guy.
I actually have no pants on right now.
But he's got no seltzer next to him, so that's how you know that things are a little bit different. All right. Okay, State of the Union, as Krystal mentioned. This is something where the president is basically running for re-election. I actually did not know this, and I'm actually curious what you guys think of this. I don't really know why, but a lot of people watch the State of the Union. So I was looking at 2022 data for some of the most watched programming in the United States, top 100. Vast majority of it was the NFL, unsurprisingly, or so it was almost all sporting events. The only political one, and it was actually within the top 50, State of the Union. Tens of millions of people watch and actually tune into this, probably more so than when President Biden eventually will announce his reelection. So this is his case, and he's running on the economy. So one of the things that we pulled, and this is a very important metric as to how exactly he's talking right now, let's go ahead and put our first element up here on the screen, guys. A1 is the state of the U.S. economy right now. I don't think there's ever been a weirder economy to actually discuss, which is the jobs report came in red hot, 517,000 jobs added in January. They completely crushed the estimates. We have a 53-year low of unemployment. We have modest real wage growth. We have changed from a zero interest rate environment. Social Security checks went up. However, they went up because of inflation, and that's the downside to this entire discussion, which is that people are upset about the state of the economy. In some ways, they've never felt worse, and we'll get to that. And in general, there's a sense of malaise, while all of the top-line metrics are really good. So we've struggled with this a lot here on the show, which is how do you describe that? You know, eggs are $7, but, you know, people have got jobs. So what is that? What type of economy is that? And how does a president relay that to the American people?
Marshall, why don't you pick that one up? Because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the argument that they're going to want to really make here is that things were at their worst probably last summer. And since then, we've seen, and this is me echoing what a different version of Biden would be saying on 15 different levels, but things have just gotten better, and they're going to keep getting better. And we should have faith in the president that that message is going to work. That's basically, I think, what they're going to want to get from folks. Because if you just really see with those midterm results, Republicans just came in thinking that the economic message was going to be particularly successful. In fact, that malaise Saagar you referenced was going to translate into the ballot box, and it really didn't. So I think they're just betting that the next 2 years are going to follow the pattern that September to November did.
Yeah. But I feel like they might be learning the wrong lesson for that, because I don't think that the midterms were really a referendum, like to the extent that they outperformed expectations, which no doubt about it, they definitely did, and to the extent that Republicans underperformed expectations. I don't know that it really reflected that people felt great about how the economy was going, because we just haven't seen that data reflected anywhere. I mean, let's go ahead and put the next element up on the screen. You have record numbers of Americans saying that they are worse off under Joe Biden economically. That's not a good sign. You've got plenty of people who are saying we're on the wrong track. You have people feeling like we're headed into a recession or we're already in a recession. I just saw numbers today about how everybody's spending down like whatever savings they were able to accumulate during the pandemic from pandemic relief programs. They're spending all of that down. You have credit card debt going up and going up. So you might have a low unemployment number, but people are not feeling like this is a great economy. And I've always thought there's a real danger in trying to oversell something to try to pretend like, hey, mission accomplished, we got this, it's all good, when that is not what people are feeling or experiencing in their regular lives.
I mean, I actually think we talked about this before, but it's the bluff strategy. And I actually think there is a little bit of wisdom in that. I think that this is why you see after every State of the Union, you get a little bit of a pump in the approval rating, 5 points, if you're lucky, maybe 10 points. Now it's temporary, doesn't last forever, but you get a little bit of because people are looking for, the rah-rah, cheerlead, let's go get this, we're America type stuff. So I think there is wisdom in that. But I agree with your point that I don't think the economy is great. Like, yeah, they're probably going to do a victory lap over these jobs numbers, but we looked at the data, Krystal, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we see that it was mostly like medical field and service sector jobs?
Yeah.
So that's what people, so basically, I mean, look, gig economy type stuff, right? Like people have jobs, but it's not like it used to be back in the day where you have a manufacturing job, you make decent money, you have a pension, you have a house and a car and maybe even a little vacation home or something. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so to break down the jobs numbers a little bit, you're absolutely right that the most of the growth has been hospitality, leisure, so things that in the service economy that really went away during the pandemic. That is now coming back, and so there's a lot of job growth there. There's a lot of job growth in terms of healthcare. I mean, that's both in terms of like demographic trends, but also you had a lot of turnover during the pandemic in the healthcare sector as well. So that's where a lot of the growth is. And you also see, in terms of wages, you see the fastest growth of wages, which is still not enough, especially when you consider inflation, is also at the lower end of the spectrum. But when you consider that we've gone decades without the lower end of the spectrum getting any raise whatsoever, when you consider the wage stagnation that we've had basically my entire life, it's going to take a lot more than a tiny percentage point increase, slightly more than inflation, for people in that segment of the economy to feel like, hey, I'm good, everything is okay now. So, yeah, I think it is a strange economy. I think there are things that the Biden administration can sell about what they've done so far, with working across the aisle in certain instances with the infrastructure bill, getting the Inflation Reduction Act passed. I just saw some numbers about how that has created something like 100,000 jobs in terms of green energy. There are things there to sell. But I think you've got to level with people and meet them where they are. And the bottom line is Americans do not feel like it is mission accomplished. They feel very unstable. They feel like they are worse off than they were previously. And if you aren't meeting that emotional energy and also laying out a path of, okay, here's what we have to do from there, there's no doubt that your political adversaries are going to take advantage of that opening.
Yeah, for me, I think that Biden's speech has got to be all about balance. As Kyle, as you said, I mean, President Obama, essentially we have the same economy now that we did under Obama. Obama crawled out in 2008, and then you did see some job growth, but the job growth was all in non-unionized sector, service economy. Wages were significantly down. That's one of the things that Mitt Romney actually ran against him. So if I'm Biden, one of the things that you want to do is, you want to bluff your way a little bit. I actually think leaning into the economy would be the biggest mistake. So he's got three of the most popular things right now that are on his side. Number one is stop the steal. And actually, we have an excerpt right now from the president of what he's going to open, or at least be at the top of the speech. Quote, 2 years ago, our democracy faced its greatest threat since the Civil War. Today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. Now, look, I'm not saying I agree with that. Personally, I find it cringe. That said, it would be completely undeniable to say that that message didn't resoundingly work during the midterm. So that's number one. Economically, it's not even about selling what he's done or selling what he plans to do, because we all know it's not going to happen. It's like these people have people in their ranks who want to cut Social Security. Yeah. And even though inflation is up, and that's why the Social Security checks went up, he'd be like, you got a raise under President Biden. Again, I'm just making clear, like, politically what he should be saying. And then third is abortion, obviously. If you have those three things and you put yourself as a bulwark against GOP extremism, specifically on Stop the Steal and on abortion, while contrasting yourself relentlessly with Speaker McCarthy, with the Freedom Caucus on the debt ceiling, I actually think that, and at the end of the day, that's the most honest, right, Marshall? That's all he actually can do. You can say all you want about a billionaire minimum tax. That's not going to happen, okay? It didn't happen during the Democratic unified government. It's certainly not going to happen whenever we're talking about cutting Social Security. So an honest and a balanced version of the speech, I actually think that might land. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the two things to highlight that you really just hinted at are Biden's central political skill, which only really came into account at this period of his life, so it explains why he wasn't able to become president at, the earlier 40-year period in his political career, is against conventional wisdom, he's read the political mood of the country. So, for example, 2019, 2020, his whole candidacy, once again, this isn't a comment on how he actually governed, but his candidacy is actually let's make things normal. It's not actually about being the youngest candidate. It's not about being the hippest candidate. It's not about having the best policy, quote unquote. It's just, I get the sense that Americans are sick and tired of everything being crazy. So I'm just going to run as the old, reliable, conventional guy. That was the right call in 2020. In 2022, I think all of us are on record, to echo your point, Saagar, in arguing that, hey, the democracy's under threat thing is cringe. It wasn't just us, sort of us arguing that. Basically, the broad mainstream of both parties thought that was going to be an effective message. That was an incredibly effective message, especially in the swing states that are going to make or break him in 2024. So the real thing I'm looking for tonight is Biden going to be able to read and set up what the actual political vibe, quote unquote, is moving forward? And then the other thing to think about is, obviously, the Republican responses, party responses in general, aren't particularly important. But I think this one is going to be important in the sense that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, newly elected governor of Arkansas and obviously former press secretary for President Trump, she is basically representing like the mainstream of the Republican Party. And if we're looking back at, American politics since 2008, I think one of the most important stories has been the Republican Party's consistent inability, with the exception of Trump in 2016, of reading the political vibe. So you obviously have the Tea Party wins, but then that leads to Tea Party win arrogance going into 2012. That leads to Mitt Romney winning the nomination. That leads to Trump misreading the electorate in 2020. And of course, 2022, where Republicans thought that the inflation numbers and gas prices would be enough to win a resoundingly straightforward victory with the claims of a red wave. So the real test is going to be, can Biden could Biden repeat what he's been able to do since basically 2018? And then will Republicans actually read the country correctly?
That's a great point. So I want to get everybody here's opinion. So we have some excerpts, actually, of Sarah Sanders. This is what I hate about the response. If you have an excerpt of your response, and it's not a response. It's just a pre-planned attack speech. It's like, if you have a scripted speech that you could release before the speech, then it's not an actual response. But all right, let's put that to the side. I'll read it for everybody. Krystal, Kyle, I want your guys' reaction. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. You get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves. Our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. While you reap the consequences of their failures, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality that Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace, but we are under attack in a left-wing culture war that we didn't start and we never wanted to fight. So that's what we have so far. What do you guys think?
Oh, boy. All right, here we go again. Look, the argument is never going to land if you're trying to say that Joe Biden is woke. This is the guy who famously had gaffes, before he became president, like, bro, you can't go into a 7-Eleven without seeing an Indian behind the counter. Yes. I mean, this guy was just, shooting from the hip.
I will defend him on that. Look, there is some truth to it. All right, let's just put it to rest.
You're just not going to get him on the woke stuff. It's just not going to happen. Now, on the taxes thing, I just find that point kind of funny because Republicans in the House just passed what's called the fair tax, which is effectively a 30% tax, a 30% sales tax, and that is a massively regressive tax. So it raises taxes on the poor and the working class, while it cuts taxes for the wealthy. So I always found it interesting. I think this is an argument that Republicans have made effectively. They've defined themselves as like, we're the tax cut party. And I think a lot of people believe that means, they're going to cut my taxes, random working class American. But Effectively, that's not the case. They actually are increasing taxes on working people, or they want to, according to their own plans, and decreasing it for the wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, the fair tax stuff is such an own goal that it is unbelievable. And for people who don't know, a vote on the fair tax was something that the Kevin McCarthy holdouts demanded. And as Kyle just alluded to, what it says is you're going to get rid of the income tax altogether, and instead you're going to have a 30% sales tax. So as expensive as all your groceries, your meat, your eggs, your milk, your whatever is at the grocery store, how about we add 30% to that? That's literally what they demanded in terms of their, that was one of their concessions that they got from McCarthy. So yes, on that part, they have left themselves incredibly vulnerable. I'd be shocked if Biden doesn't talk about that ultimately in the State of the Union tonight. But another piece of this, she sort of alluded to like these fights over education that Ron DeSantis and now Trump are really leaning into. And I think it just, whatever you think about the politics and ideology of that, I think it is a stupid strategy politically. They thought that Glenn Youngkin really won in Virginia on running against critical race theory. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. I think you had, to the extent that the election was about education, it was much more about that you just come out of a pandemic where schools had been literally shut down. Yep. But the minute that you're the party that is going, I, as president, from the federal government top down, want to tell you what your kids can and can't learn, that does not feel like freedom. And it also doesn't, you still to this day, even with Republicans leaning so heavily into this fight, guess who voters say they prefer on education? It's still Democrats. You know why? Because the things they care about from the federal government on education are like funding and getting more teachers in the classroom. Those are the sorts of things that they're interested in hearing from candidates. So I know they think this is a real winner. I don't think there is any evidence to back that up whatsoever.
What do you think, Marshall? The other side of the coin, I would say, is Ron DeSantis just won by 20 points. He's incredible. This is essentially, if I were to look at this, I'd say this is the DeSantis theory of the case. Republicans did win 6% on the national popular vote during the midterms. They clearly think that this is a winner. What do you think of this as a response and in relation to what Krystal and Kyle were saying?
Yeah, I just want to echo what they both said because I think it's really helpful analysis. So, my take would probably be that education is the definition of a state and law. I mean, it literally is in terms of the way our country is structured.
Right.
But if you're looking, if I would bet money that if you're looking at a state like Florida and a state like Virginia, a purple state in the case of Virginia, and now a very red state in the case of Florida, yeah, it's probably true that if you're fighting over school boards and you're fighting over how the specific state government's going to set education's path, yeah, totally. I think that's the definition of an issue Republicans could win on. But I think we could look at the results in the 2022 midterms and say, hey, if we zoom out, does that state and local energy translate to national issues? I don't see it as much. And then Saagar, secondly, to your point about Florida, look, I would bet that if we just took out, let's say, Ron DeSantis' fight with Disney, and let's say, for example, how he's really been aggressive on the university system, like AKA appointing new boards at Florida universities, like explicitly fighting against wokeness, that's about him signaling for the 2024 Republican primary. It has nothing to do with the broader party realignment in Florida. I bet if we actually looked at the voters who, for example, were probably more purple in the 2000s, they're not voting based on how Disney is specially, like, Disney has a special district that was governed in a unique way. Him getting rid of that isn't shifting those voters. It's just the Florida Democratic Party has been a dumpster fire since basically 2010. So I think that's the most important thing you need to think about.
Go ahead, guys.
What was I going to say? Something about, never mind. Go ahead.
I
was going to say something about this.
We can pivot to polling.
I was going to actually, Saagar,
Yeah.
you made this point about, you were laying out what, if you were DeSantis, how you would run against Trump.
Yeah.
And you were talking about, look, the economy in Florida is good.
We're booming.
We're open for business.
Yeah.
I think, to Marshall's point, like his strength in the state and the fact that he was able to win and win so, lopsidedly, I think has a lot more to do with that than it does these niche, hyper online Republican base issues, which may serve him well in a Republican primary. But back to your question, Marshall, of like, are Republicans going to be able to read the room in terms of the mood of the electorate? Like, how many regular moms, like swing mom voters out there are like, you know what really the problem in the country is and in my life is wokeness.
Yeah.
Like,
and
it's a niche online issue.
To your point, though, DeSantis, I watched his debate with Charlie Crist. And when debating Charlie Crist, he didn't just do the Republican Ron DeSantis primary tap dance. He did the general election sort of tap dance.
Yes.
And so hearing what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said there, that sounds to me more like a Republican primary speech than a general election speech. And she should be doing more general election type speech now because you're talking nominally to the whole country, not just to your own little segment.
Although she also is probably auditioning for like a vice presidential slot. Maybe?
Yeah, who knows?
You think so?
I think my actual takeaway is that all of that would be smart, but here's the thing. Republicans don't actually agree on economic policy, so you just have to leave it out of the speech.
True.
And I actually think that the real reason that it's not in there, outside of a mention of high gas prices and or taxes, is literally because they really don't agree across the gamut on all of this. Yeah, I mean, look, I've always thought it's a potent strategy for Ron DeSantis. I thought Look at the Scoreboard was the best political comeback that he's given so far. It's perfect, right? Just look at the scoreboard. In terms of how they're talking, in his debates or whatever with Gavin Newsom, it's like, dude, literally 500,000 of your people moved to my state. That's it. Dunk. And the reason why is open for business, keeping the schools open. Everybody's moving here. We're dynamic. We're having fun. We're trying to the extent that we're prosecuting the culture war, it's to try and preserve normalcy, quote unquote, whatever that means to the people of Florida. So that's probably why I think that the Sarah Huckabee Sanders speech is not going to land necessarily in the way that it needs to. But let's also consider this. How many people are watching that actual rebuttal, right? Yeah. Is this real? At this point, is this the general election? Or what do we all talk about? That's a Republican primary speech. Well, probably Republicans are the only ones who are going to watch it.
Well,
what's the reality that all three of these cable networks even play? Look, we're not going to play it.
The only way a lot of people are going to watch it is if it's a freaking disaster.
We'll watch the clips of it after.
There's a, Marco Rubio water drinking situation.
Yeah. I think about him every time I drink something on here on the stage. Yeah. I'm like, I hope I don't pour this all over myself.
Bring back Bobby Jindal now.
I am also traumatized by the Marco Rubio water drinking situation. Someone has to drink water on camera. Yeah, and Bobby Jindal, I mean, that one is just infamous because that dude was seen as like the up and coming star, and then that was it. That was it.
Done.
So there is a chance that a lot of people will see Sarah Huckabee Sanders' speech, but she should hope that that is not what comes to pass.
That's a good point. Okay, let's talk about polling data because this actually gets to exactly what we were all talking about. What do people care about going into the State of the Union? So let's go ahead and throw up this next element here up on the screen. Latest data that we have from Pew Research right ahead of the State of the Union. I'm going to go ahead and read these off. Our graphics team did a great job here. Strengthening the economy is the American top policy priority. Dealing with COVID-19 is among the lowest. So that gives me some hope. So I'm going to read these off number by number. Strengthening the economy, 75. Reducing healthcare, 60% or 60%. Defending against terrorism, 60. Reducing the influence of money in politics, 59. Making Medicare financially sound, 58. Reducing the budget deficit, 57. Reducing crime, 57. Improving education, 57. Reducing the availability of illegal drugs, 53. Dealing with immigration, 53. Energy, 52. Improving the job situation, 49. Dealing with the problems of poor people, 47. The environment, 44. Transportation, 42. Military, 40. Dealing with climate change, 37. Dealing with global trade is 34. Addressing issues around race is 32. Dealing with challenges facing parents is 27. And dealing with the coronavirus outbreak is all the way at the bottom with 26. So what I take away from that is that this is the, and I hate using the phrase, but it's a kitchen table issue as normal. And it's like one of those which is kitschy. You sound like a 1990s Bill Clinton political pundit, but the guy won the presidency. So maybe we should just borrow from it. What do you take away from those numbers, Marshall, in the context of everything that we're talking about? You can sip your drink first and then answer.
No, I'm sipped. We're good to go. So the number one thing that stuck out to me when you were reading that out loud was that energy was in the middle, which seems like a huge win if you're Biden.
Massive. I agree.
If you had this conversation in the middle of the summer, like I was saying earlier, it's all about energy. It's all about the prices being high. It's all about everyone seeing the photo of that, $7, $8 gas we had in California. So that's the victory right there. And that's kind of the point we're making at the top about Biden doesn't have to convince people that everything is hunky-dory and perfect. That's not what his job has been. It's kind of funny if you're, and this is kind of why there's this interesting like Obama versus Biden contrast. I think if you're President Obama, you have to convince more of that. But for Biden, it's basically like, look, man, it's pretty okay. Let's keep things okay. So that really falls into that. And then two, and this is just where the COVID thing is so interesting. This goes back to the Ron DeSantis conversation. To what degree is the 2024 electorate going to be interested in relitigating 2020 and 2021? So that's another thing to really think about there too, because that poll number of COVID concerns just, I think, would generally skew towards us just moving on from that issue and basically in either direction, pretending it didn't happen or not.
Yeah, well, and that's a problem for Ron DeSantis, too, because his whole case against Trump is about what he did with regard to the coronavirus versus what Trump did. And so if that is lessening, if that's becoming less of a hot issue, even among Republican-based voters, that makes his case somewhat less compelling at this point. But, you know, looking at the issue set, it makes sense why Biden is going to focus on some of the things that he's going to focus on. Apparently, in his State of the Union address, he's going to pull back some of the Build Back Better elements that, you know, didn't make it through into the Inflation Reduction Act, talking about renewing the expanded child tax credit, something I am very big on. $35 insulin cap for all Americans, that also be great, and healthcare costs was one of the top issues there. Medicaid expansion in 11 states, and child care and elder care. Now, as Saagar said, this is all messaging. None of this is going to happen with the Republicans in control of the House. So this begins to lay out what the, you know, reelect pitch will be, what I would do in a second term as president. But you can see he's like squarely focused on these sort of core economic issues that clearly are top of mind for voters.
Yeah, and when you look at, you know, the top one, strengthening the economy, then you have reducing healthcare costs. There are things he can point to of like, look, we're moving in the right direction here. So the thing we were talking about earlier, Krystal, we're onshoring 350,000 jobs right now. That's something that he probably will brag about, if I had to guess. Also, on the lowering healthcare costs, I mean, as part of the IRA, they do have lower prescription drug prices. Now, it's only certain drugs, and it's only for seniors, but there's also a cap at $2,000 out of pocket, and there's $288 billion in savings for seniors. These are things that he could bring up to say, like, look, I'm addressing your top concerns, and so, like, I'm on it, and what are those guys doing? Nothing.
Yeah. By the way, shout out to the live chat. Marshall, my favorite comment so far is that you are the Breaking Point's designated survivor. That's a good one. That's a good one. We gotta shout it out to all of them. You guys,
Saagar said George Santos should be
the terrible monologue I'd have to open with tomorrow.
Yeah, it's your show, man.
Just get ChatGPT to write it.
Yeah,
It'll
just
be
get ChatGPT to write it. If we get, by the way, you know, if the Capitol does, God forbid, get attacked, we will be incinerated in the blast because we're close enough to that. So we love you all. You'll be able to see all of that going on here. If we have any super chats that are good, we'll go ahead and read some of those.
Saagar floated beforehand that George Santos should be the designated survivor because he's what the country. He's a true.
Yeah. He's what we deserve.
Of what the country is. Yes.
I have a fun Santos update if everybody is interested. Santos has sat himself in the center aisle of the House of Representatives, specifically to try and shake President Biden's hand on national TV.
Yes.
And he is drawing attention to himself with a bright traffic cone orange tie.
Oh, my God.
You got to give it to the man. He has no shame.
That is a bad call.
Zero shame.
First of all, fashion-wise, disaster. But second, just the shamelessness. Like, he knows that tens of millions of people are going to watch. He's going to go in there for that handshake. There are a couple of notorious members of Congress who do this, who get there hours and hours early. Sheila Jackson Lee, I remember from my time as a congressional intern, it was like lore that she always does it because apparently her constituents are always like, I saw you at the State of the Union shaking. Apparently it works. Again, I don't know why people watch this thing, but they do.
This is going to save George Santos' career.
Maybe it will.
Gets that big Biden handshake and he can grab the photo.
Right.
It's amazing.
Also, what are his creds?
I hope it does happen, though.
How can he have GOP creds if he's going to sit there and shake the president's hand?
District. He's got to do what he's got to do.
As for other stunts, Kevin McCarthy has confirmed he will not rip up the State of the Union. So thank you, Kevin, for
Is he
keeping
gonna
decorum
clap like this
in the House. Yeah, will he do a clap like this? It's always fun, actually.
That's actually his biggest problem. You're not going to turn him into a meme in either direction.
I agree. agree.
Yeah,
He doesn't
fair.
have it in him.
That's fair. That's unfortunate.
Right.
Something I look for in a good Speaker of the House is very memeable.
Right. I mean, listen, actually, Biden, if I remember, was hilarious to watch during Obama's State of the Unions. He would sometimes like forget to button his jacket, or sometimes he would do that thing where he would button every time he stood up, unbutton every time.
Oh, no.
It was like, chill, dude. Just sit up and down. It's all good. We're fine. You don't need to button it every single time.
It's always the game too of like who's gonna stand for which lines and who's gonna sit for the other lines. There's always that dynamic going on too.
The majesty of the State of the Union.
Yeah, it is funny though because I mean people really do take time out, like normal people take time out and sit down, and it is part of like the American tradition. And so it is, as much as we sort of make fun of some of the pomp and circumstance and like ridiculous nature of how this all comes together and the way people behave, et cetera. It is important, and I'm in favor of more transparency, more accountability, more going in front of the American people and laying out what you did and how you're selling it and what you think about it and what's going to come next. So I am a State of the Union supporter, and I am.
It's not a bad thing.
I am unironically excited to hear how this all goes tonight.
The one thing I wish people every now and then a president would do is be like more honest and say, ladies and gentlemen, the State of the Union is terrible. There actually was one, I forget who it was. We watched a compilation the other day. I don't know if you remember. Was it Ford? I think maybe Ford did it.
Well, he did it in a way where he was like, it was like moving on from Nixon, as in it was like, look, I get it, we've had a bad time, but now we're all together, and I pardoned him.
Blaming the other guy.
I mean, he was smart. He almost won re-election, so it actually worked.
I was going to say, how'd that turn out for our president?
I'm just saying, look,
enough.
it came close. You got to give the man credit where it's due.
Well, actually, wait, real quick, Kyle, because it's kind of interesting because you think about it. I think what makes, and this goes to the whole debate about whether or not the Republicans want to make Trump the presidential candidate again. Trump's the only guy in modern American politics who's won, and once again, we're referring to 2015, 2016, on a message of pessimism and carnage. Like, we make fun of Jimmy Carter for saying malaise for a reason. I mean, he didn't technically say malaise, but like it was called the malaise speech because that was the general vibe of it. But I think it's a real interesting test of like whether or not people are going to want to hear that everything is shitty versus, hey, we're moving forward. Things are getting more normal again. That's another one of those debates over what the country's mood is.
Yeah, I mean, there was a realism to it, though. Like when Trump was specific in saying, our infrastructure is a mess, our airports are a mess, the middle of the country's been hollowed out, we're shipping all the jobs to Mexico, and that stuff is actually true. Now Republicans were used to the Ronald Reagan style of politics for a very long time, where it's like morning in America and everything's happy and sunshine and puppies and all that stuff. And Trump really changed that mold. I think a lot of that is dependent on the personality, kind of. Like, can the personality, create a convincing case with the pessimism, or is it, somebody whose disposition is more in line with something that's like sunny and positive? I think there are other candidates who could probably get away with it and do it. I mean, to an extent, Bernie kind of did that too, right? Sure. 2015, 2016.
Yeah,
he was more hopeful, but certainly,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that is a note that Biden could potentially land. Listen, I just don't. Okay, all right. Biden at this point in his career, no, he probably can't land it. Let me wind that back. But I don't think there is anything more powerful than meeting people where they are, than expressing a truth that they feel like in their life and that they don't feel like is being reflected in Washington. And that was the power of Trump.
Yes.
Like, he said things that other politicians weren't saying, and people were like, you know what? I feel that. Like, that's what I see. That's how I see things at this point. And so you can meet people where they're at and not just be like, and so everything sucks. I mean, Biden always layers in this, like, American exceptionalism, optimism, whatever. Like, we're American, we're gonna do this and whatever. Like, you can have that piece too, and here's the plan, and here's how we're gonna pull it together. I just think it's a fool's errand to try to persuade people that the economy is amazing when that's not what they feel in their lives.
By the way, Trump would also, when he did his State of the Unions, he would also brag relentlessly. So, like, as long as he's in power, it's like everything's great, everything's phenomenal, everything's amazing. But when he was out of power, it's like it's terrible. Remember when he was having the debate publicly? Should I do Make America Great Again, or should I do Keep America Great?
Right.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
He was like polling the audience, and I think he actually used both slogans.
He certainly did. Yeah. I mean, that was actually a funny time. I remember that. By the way, shout out to our super chats. Marshall, somebody wants to get you on JRE. Kyle, somebody is loving the hair, and somebody says, I would make an excellent statesman. You are incorrect, sir. I do not agree with that. Pulling back a little bit, Marshall, I don't remember the quote, but there was a Peter Thiel quote, I believe, from, what was it, 2015, where he talked about supporting Trump. And it was anchored in exactly what we're talking about here, where Thiel, known in Silicon Valley for contrarianism, effectively said something, and Marshall will fill in the gap here, where he was like, no, I actually think that the message to bet on is a message of decline, not a message of optimism. Marshall, I know you have more of the details on that.
Yeah, no, this is in George Packer's interviews with Peter Thiel from 2013. He also did a great book called The Unwinding. It's somewhere back here, but I think folks should definitely check out George's 2010s work. But basically, the point of the quote was, Peter was saying, my contrarian bet is that everyone thinks that people are looking for optimism and a sunny disposition. This is coming out of, obviously, 2012, where you've got Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan running as America's comeback team, all that, like, very specific, like, we can rebuild and fix all the mistakes Obama supposedly made. And his point was, I think whoever's smart is going to pick up on the vibe that the country wants something negative. And obviously, I guarantee you that Trump did not read The Unwinding or read The New Yorker. But once again, I think that speaks to how in certain moments, certain politicians have specific skill sets that are important. And Trump's important skill set in 2014, 2015, 2016 was that he could pick that up when all of his opponents, Marco Rubio running as like the candidate of the new American century, that was actually like the slogan. You have like Jeb Bush saying we're going to have like 4% economic growth and we can do it. But this is once again the problem, though, of a politician who's specifically good in one moment and not another moment, which is Trump bringing that energy to periods when he didn't need to bring it. And I also think Trump's like everything is a disaster energy is also what urges him to be an election denier. It's what urges him to select like ridiculous candidates like, Carrie Lake, use his endorsements improperly. So the real test is, can he course correct, which probably not, honestly.
It's also, I mean, it's also the difference between being an incumbent and being in opposition.
Right.
Right. If you're in opposition, it's easier to be like, everything sucks and these people are blowing in, it's terrible, and it's harder. I mean, admittedly, you're in a more difficult position when you're like, I've been president for a few years now and things are still challenging, but we've done some good stuff. I mean, there is just more of a line ultimately that you have to walk there.
Yeah, that's true. Quick shout out. Somebody left a super chat, Alex Das Lieb. He says, Biden fetishizes bipartisanship so much. He has one red eyeball and one blue eyeball. I'll be happy and wrong if he vetoes cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security.
I do think he would veto cuts to Medicare, Social Security. Also, given the fact that you have Donald Trump out there literally saying, don't do that. So there's going to be a sizable portion of Republican senators and of Republican congressmen who are like, look, I may support this stuff behind the scenes, but I'm not voting for that. So
I hope that's true. I hope Trump really still has that kind of sway over them.
I personally think that, yes, I believe that on this issue, that while in the driver's seat, the Freedom Caucus and some of the ideologues they're probably, at this point, I could be totally wrong, and we will see what the ultimate vote count on this. I do not think it will ultimately come down to cuts for Social Security. I do think that is important. Fun factoid, Biden will be the oldest man to ever deliver the State of the Union today and from this day forward. So that is a fun one for everybody. In terms of what else that we know about the speech, one of the things he's actually going to be taking credit for, Marshall, and this goes to what you were talking about, is gas prices. So whenever you brought it up, I've got the national average in front of me. It's $3.45 a gallon on average. I mean, it's still high, but it's not terrible. If you look at a year ago, it was exactly $3.40. That's right around the time that Russia invaded Ukraine, or I believe right before that. So gas is relatively stable. There's not a state in this entire country where gas is over $5 a gallon. Our friends in California are paying $4.60. Of course, that's going to be an important metric. So I really think that he just has to come back to the basics. Like, he's got to talk about Trump. Stop the steal. You want to frame it exactly in that way. You want to hammer abortion probably at the very top. Thank the voters who kept the Democrats in the Senate. Give shout-outs to John Fetterman. Give shout-outs to who's the Arizona gubernatorial candidate, Katie Hobbs. You want to give shout-outs to those people and say, we heard you on that issue. And, this is part of what's folding it back into re-election is, but Republicans have the House. So if you want us to get anything done, you have to vote for us again in 2022.
So I want to ask Marshall. Yeah. Marshall, how long do you think Biden can keep going back to this January 6th well?
As long, that's a great question. Yeah. As long as Republicans nominate candidates that activate voters as, whoa, let's not do that. And this is the thing, because like that's actually the way to think about it, which is the reason why Republicans were screwed in 2022 is they, like I think many of us in like the commentary space, thought that voters didn't care. And it's not as if like Republicans were like, and by that I mean like the party establishment in D.C. It's not as if they were, explicitly saying, "Yay, stop the steal." But I think they were probably arguing or believing it's going to be a wash. But it was a huge issue, obviously, in those big results in those swing states. So as long as Republicans nominate the wrong candidates, and I'm not meaning wrong in the moral sense, I'm saying wrong in the sense that candidates who are performing for party primary bases, who want to hear stop the steal bullshit, without obviously like intersecting with the general election, Biden's going to be able to talk about it until the Republican Party, and by the way, I don't mean the entire Republican Party, I mean until swing state Republicans basically move on from this issue or start saying in their primaries, hey, we'll select whoever reads the vibe and doesn't talk about elections not working. Yeah, Biden's going to be able to go to it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. As long as Donald Trump is alive and breathing, Biden should thump it for all he can.
Not going to let it go.
I wish it didn't work this way, folks, but it does.
So there's another piece of that's going to be very critical to his performance. As much as we all pay a lot of attention to the policy and have a lot of opinions on what would be good and what's bad and how things have gone, all of that, a lot of this is also people taking a vibe check of whether this 80-year-old man is up to the task of another 4 years.
That's a good point.
And, it's not just because they're concerned about, okay, can he personally handle it, but you also will have visibly behind him Kamala Harris, the vice president, who would be next in line, who not a lot of people are super fond of. We can actually put this up on the screen from the New York Times. This piece from the New York Times about Kamala Harris is devastating. The headline here is Kamala Harris is trying to define her vice presidency. Even her allies are tired of waiting. They say in here that even some of the Democrats that her own office told reporters would give them supportive quotes confided privately that they had lost hope in her. So even the people that Kamala Harris was like, this guy is going to say great things about me. When this New York Times reporter actually went to them, they were like, oh, this is not going that well. And so you couple the age issue with concerns about whether the current vice president would be up to the job, and just the optics of how he's able to navigate this speech and what his energy level is like and how he delivers it. That's going to be almost as crucial, Saagar, I think, as anything else that he says here.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that always drives me crazy is that they mention like Biden, who overcame his stutter, and they're like, he's working very hard on Listen, I've listened to the man for literally over a decade. He didn't have a stutter until he miraculously became 78 years old and started running for president again. Shocking. So they're pointing that as one of the issues that he's going to have to deal with is overcome his stutter. You're right, though. Look, it's a key thing. And if you look at all of the polling data that we have available to us, Biden's age is a serious problem. It is one of the major reservations. It's one of the main reasons Democrats do not want him to run again. You said this, and it's internal. He will be 86 years old on his last year as president if he gets reelected. That's crazy. Like 86 years old. It's difficult to even describe. I think, most people know who has interacted with somebody who is that old and exactly what exponential decline can look like, especially at that age. This is not a commentary. I hope that it doesn't happen to him, but if we're betting on the odds, it's very likely to. And then, if you're going to have a political successor, one of our super chats says, I hope that Biden fires Mayor Pete live on the air. That would be good for his political popularity. I agree. Listen, he'd be like, we're going to make he goes, come on, man. Airplanes aren't flying. You're out of here.
We got, by the way, I got the exact same super chat.
Oh, really? That's perfect. Yeah. Whoever that guy is, I love this guy.
Look, that's a brilliant idea.
It's true to a lot of normie Americans. Vibes really do matter.
And they should.
Vibes are really important. And so a lot of the speech is going to be just about optics and very intangible things like how's he communicating. And so I hope they give him a nice, solid dose of Adderall and he can get through it. I also wanted to point out that I do find it genuinely hilarious that Biden really struggles to talk, but he's more popular than Kamala Harris. That's interesting to me. And there's something, she has like an anti-charisma about her. There was a story that came out yesterday or the day before where she says how she hates platitudes, which is the most ironic thing anybody's ever said because she is a platitude machine.
Oh my God.
Yeah. glorious.
That is
What were you
amazing.
saying there, Marshall? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, no, I think the thing that, so several things. So one, I just looked it up. So Trump right now is 76 years old. And this is one of those awkward arguments that DeSantis is in such an awkward position because the strongest arguments he could make are ones that basically rely on actually assuming that Biden is more powerful than he looks. So I think those, so for example, if Biden's just this like weak, hobbled old man, he's going to be, you know, knocked over just like that. Okay, like, does it really matter that Trump is also 76 years, that Trump is 76 years old and would obviously be like, you know, in his mid 80s by the time he leaves as well too. A strong argument for DeSantis would just be that generation, would that be making an aggressive version of that generation argument, but he's not gonna be able to make it, I think, for, I think, complicated reasons with like what the GOP base is looking for. But then on a broader level too, I think the problem that Republicans also have when they focus on like Biden's, you know, speech issues and how he's doddering is, I think at this point it's a sunk cost. Yeah. Everybody knows it's been priced in. If you just don't think that Joe Biden is particularly compelling, speech issues aside, you're probably already lost. Then I think the last thing is that I'm just really skeptical of these poll numbers, especially of like Democrats who are saying, oh, like we don't really want Biden to run again, because I think at the end of the day, if you give them most of their alternatives that are actually plausible, they don't want that alternative.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then B, if you ask that question in the vacuum, that's a different question than, okay, Biden or Ron DeSantis, which is going to be the main thing. It's a base turnout issue.
All right, so let's take a look at some polling. Let's put this next element up on the screen, B2. And you have Trump-Biden head-to-head here from, this is ABC Washington Post. And you have had, since September, a significant move towards Donald Trump. So they have Trump over Biden, 48-45. That's 3 points. It's, I believe, within the margin of error. You have him up 9 points on Biden with regards to independents. Again, this is a 5-point swing towards Trump from September. And, you know, the reason Joe Biden won the Democratic nomination, the reason he is president of the United States right now is because Democrats thought he was the most electable candidate and their #1 goal was beating Donald Trump. So the more he has numbers like this, where it's like, I don't know, even you're not even in a position to beat Donald. After everything that Donald Trump has done and how sick everybody is of this guy, you're still not in a position to beat this guy. That's a real problem for him.
You're looking skeptical, Kyle.
I'm very skeptical of that. Yeah, okay. I mean, look, we're a little removed from the insanity of the Trump presidency, you know, but I don't think it'll take all that much to remind Americans just how insane Trump was. And yeah, Biden was the return to normal candidate. Like, okay, things are getting a little too wacky. Let's get back in line here. Let's calm down a little bit. And he won. I think if it were to be Biden versus Trump again, Biden will do the best against Trump that he could do against anybody. In other words, if you put DeSantis against Biden, I think DeSantis is a big favorite. Yeah. You put fill in the blank with generic Republican versus Biden, I think the generic Republican is going to do better. I think Trump is the most beatable of the Republicans. I'm not doubting these numbers at the moment, but I don't think that can hold. I don't think these numbers will hold.
Agree with you that Trump is the most beatable, probably, of the Republicans, but I also don't underestimate him.
Yeah. Don't underestimate Trump?
Yes.
Yeah,
I am. I'm doing that.
I don't underestimate
I am underestimating
him.
You've always underestimated
him. No, wait. That is, okay, I have to correct the record here. That is not true.
I'm saying let's say the last 2 years.
Correct. Hold on, Marshall. One sec. In recent times, yes, because people need to remember, I was one of the first people saying Trump can win the whole presidency. And I was one of the first people saying, especially when we realized it was Hillary versus Trump, I said Donald Trump is the favorite because he's going to pounce on Hillary for all of her weaknesses. So early on, I called a lot about the Trump era that a lot of people missed. And the conventional wisdom became like, Teflon Don, Teflon Don, Teflon Don. And again, I think I'm a little bit ahead here because I think the era of Teflon Don is largely over. Now, to be fair, it has changed a little bit in recent days. I thought DeSantis was a solid favorite. Now, I do think Trump is a favorite in the Republican primary. But I'm just saying that the conventional wisdom is still in people's heads of, oh, he's unbeatable, he's Teflon Don. And I think now it's the opposite. I think he's the most beatable, he's the most fringe, he's over on Truth Social talking about terminating the Constitution. That stuff matters.
And DeSantis is a groomer.
What's that?
He called DeSantis
That was hilarious.
Today.
I want to talk about that.
That was actually
That
fun.
was really funny.
Go ahead, Marshall. You've been waiting.
Let's actually go there for a second. I'm not sure I believe this, but I'm just going to respond to what's being said here. why shouldn't I think there's more danger of overestimating Trump than underestimating Trump. Like the story of Donald Trump, with the exception of November, the Republican primary 2015-2016 and November 2016 is the story of disaster. It's him deciding that he's going to pass a tax cut as his first act. It's deciding to do the Obamacare thing and then pissing off John McCain, so that goes down in flames. The midterms are a disaster. The 2020 election is a disaster, and he selects the worst candidates in 2022. So what's the case for thinking actually he's got something in his back pocket? He hasn't had something in his back pocket since 2016.
Correct.
Yes, hold on.
That's the
Marshall
crazy
Spitton.
Let me say.
Marshall Spitton.
Though, this dude did such an abysmal job during COVID that people were literally dying because of his lack of leadership, and he still almost won.
But he didn't.
40,000 votes, Marshall.
But he didn't.
Almost won.
But he didn't.
So you can't just write him off when it was 40,000 votes go in a different direction, and he's still president of the United States. I agree. I think DeSantis would be a stronger candidate. I think any normal Republican would be a stronger candidate. But I'm not going to go out there and say, there's no way Joe Biden could lose to this guy, because I think Joe Biden definitely could lose to this guy.
Yeah, and I think that's where I am. And more what I think I'm responding to is the idea of look, after 2022, he's done. He's dead. He's got no power. And there is quite a bit of this. Maybe it's too online, and I'm guilty of just internalizing it. But I see, especially in the days right after 2022, a lot of people were willing to say, we're moving on. Well, it's done. And guess what, guys? Ron DeSantis has not announced for president. So far, only Nikki Haley is the one who's signaling that she's going to do it. We all know that she doesn't have a chance in hell. Mike Pompeo, who is as pathetic as Nikki Haley as a candidate, is also not announcing for president. Asa Hutchinson, the guy who was talking against him on CNN, wears his super PAC.
Yeah.
So, look, he's still got a lot of power.
How about this one? Larry Hogan.
Yeah, there you go.
Look out. Larry's on the way.
The never Trump dude, right?
Right.
I mean, he's been very anti-Trump for a while now. They asked him if he would back the Republican nominee, even if it was Trump, and he was like, yes, I would. Whereas Trump is out there I don't know, we'll see. We'll see if I back the Republican nominee.
Maybe here's a better way of putting it. At the end of the day, anybody, and I actually remember saying this whenever Trump was on the ballot, and everybody was like, he can't win. I said, look, sometimes if it's 50-50, if your name is on the ballot as a presidential nominee, you absolutely can win the American presidency. And so that's when I say not underestimating him. Do I think it is more likely than not? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I look at a poll like this, and again, I'm just taking back, which is, look, Stop the Steal, that was dumb. And here's the other thing. Have you heard about it from Trump since? You might have heard about it on Truth Social. Who the hell knows what's going on Truth Social?
So I'll just say this.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the debate is electability.
Yes.
Right? And I think Marshall and I, maybe we agree on this, Marshall, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that after losing 3 elections in a row, 2018, 2020, 2022, the Republicans, even the base Republicans, some of the base Republicans might go, you know what? Maybe electability actually does matter a little bit, and maybe Republican voters will start acting a little more like Democratic voters, where Democrats seem to put that first and foremost above everything else.
I desperately wish that were to be true. Marshall,
I'm just saying it's possible.
You and I have talked about this. There is zero evidence that these people care about electability.
See, I disagree with that.
No, the Republican base.
Kyle,
especially the Trump people.
I'll come in and disagree here. So this is where there's, especially in the Breaking Point cinematic universe, there's a lot of discussion about how, the two parties are the same, body. And obviously there's critiques you could make there. But a way the two parties are desperately different from each other in a way that severely has hurt Republicans basically from 2018 onwards is Democratic Party voters, they basically just say electability. They're not thinking, okay, what's the coolest policy? They're not thinking, is this quite the guy who I like? It's just look, I just want to go across the finish line in November, and that's just it. No evidence that a majority of Republican voters think the same way. Because once again, if Republican voters thought the same way, for good or for ill, Ron DeSantis would be doing a cakewalk right now. Yep. Trump would have been shut out. Everyone, for example, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Asa Hutchinson, Larry Hogan, all these guys would have already endorsed, Ron DeSantis because it'd be that overwhelming in his favor. If a Democrat performed the way Trump performed, the notion that he could come back and run for office again, just not on the table at all whatsoever. There's a reason why Jimmy Carter never came back. There's a reason why, Al Gore didn't make a comeback. John Kerry. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I guess with the exception of, but I guess Hillary lost the primary. She didn't lose the general. The Democratic Party actually severely punishes politicians who can't win. Now, maybe that's a good thing, and that's a bad thing. Maybe it means that the party is going to be more like quote unquote corporate centrist and not really like push the needle and go more to the left and do something innovative. But that's a successful way of winning the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 elections.
So my response to that is there were many polls in the wake of the 2022 election that had DeSantis up double digits. Even today, there are still polls at the state level, certain states, where DeSantis is beating Trump in those states. So my point is not to say Republicans definitely will prioritize electability this time around. My point is let's have a little humility and realize they might actually go, you know what, we got to calm down a little bit with this psychotic guy who lost us 3 elections in a row.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, the reason why you ended up with so many fringe candidates who ran, you know, as Republicans and who actually got the nomination in a lot of key states and key races, et cetera, it really isn't so much about Trump endorsed them. It's about because that was what the Republican base was looking for. I mean, Trump successfully made Stop the Steal and where you stood on that issue like the most important litmus test in the Republican Party. You were with him or you were against him. You were either a sellout or you were, you know, a cuck and a rhino, or you were like a true believer and you were willing to say the truth on Stop the Steal. And I also don't really see any signs that that has particularly changed.
Don't deny though that there is a Republican civil war going on at the grassroots level right now. It absolutely it's happening even in right-wing media. You have Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens and those types versus Steven Crowder.
I would dispute that even matters at all. But go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying there's an actual split. There's a fight, and it's DeSantis people and Trump people. It's not like there's no fight and Trump already has this and it's a cakewalk.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Marshall.
Well, what's interesting, Saagar, I think you and I agree on this. I think I know where you're going. There's not a grassroots fight, but there really is an elite media, elite organizations. It's kind of like the political parties aren't as powerful as they used to be in terms of like who's even in charge of the RNC and the DNC. No one really knows anymore. But like what's happened is those parties have like separated into media organizations and nonprofits and think tanks. All these things used to be done by the parties themselves. That is where the fight's going on right now. So that's where people should be looking. You're not going to be, it's not like back in the, 1950s where, JFK and LBJ are battling over like state delegations from Wisconsin and Wyoming because the, party precinct committee chairman really matters there. So I think that's but this is where, and I think this is why we're overestimating DeSantis, and I see this more on the right side. The elite structures, I think, matter on the Democratic side. Not in the conspiratorial sense, but like capturing elite structures is a way of signifying electability and normalcy. On the Republican side, it doesn't really matter if DC likes you. If anything, it's probably a bad thing.
Yes.
Just from a pure political perspective. So that's a real difference between the two parties, too.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of that. So there is some truth to that, and I'm very jealous of that.
I have an update. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, who will be leaving the Biden administration to go and work for, what is it, an airline union?
No, the NHL.
Sorry,
Hockey
the
League
NHL
Players
union.
Association.
That's right, the NHL Players Association. He is officially the designated survivor tonight. So congratulations to the Labor Secretary.
Not
Also,
George Santos,
for a George Santos update, there appears to have been an altercation between Mitt Romney and George Santos on the floor.
When you say altercation, what do you mean?
I mean, like Romney said something to him. Then he looked away from him. Here, I'll play it for you guys.
Didn't Romney do some celebrity boxing thing?
Oh, actually, I don't.
Didn't he?
Yeah. Okay, so here's what you can see.
That.
Romney says something to. I wish we had this for you guys. I'm very sorry, but what you're watching is that Santos is pissed off and he's kind of like saying something back at him.
There's
so
no
I think
fisticuffs.
If I had to guess, what happened is he was like, "You're a disgrace. Don't stand in the center aisle." I'm joking. That's not what
we'll just assume that's
he
what
might have said something though to that effect that wouldn't actually be a bad thing. Apparently, yeah. So anyway, everybody on the floor right now is making fun of George Santos. Want to shout out to the super chats right now saying, I just want to say I appreciate you. Was able to get my twin brother to have a more open mind by watching. You could give your opinion on the future of the used car market, please, and what politicians could do. I'll tell you what, sir, for the used car market, keep watching the show and we will continue. I know that you have a high level of interest in that. And also, thank you very much to the other super chats. Marshall, which said that you look like Forrest Whitaker. I enjoyed
I
that
look
one.
like
And,
every single black celebrity, one of these people. It's just like, just no.
What's the most common one?
Give me something new. The most, two. So the most common one is like Charlie from The West Wing, or Gus if you're watching Psych. Those were the young day ones.
So, Saagar, if I may, I want to shout out.
Please, go ahead.
Sean DeStefano, super chat here. We give the politicians their jobs. We deserve the same health care they have. Republicans say they are pro-life, so give everyone health care.
Okay.
Agreed.
Not a particularly original slogan,
You're
however.
pro-giving everybody health care.
We'll go with it.
Support that.
You failed to entice Saagar, super chat person. You failed. You were this close.
Well, I'm just looking for some ingenuity. All right, not 1990s level dunks. But look, it's all right. We'll take it here over at Breaking Points.
Before we go over to, I think he'll be coming in here shortly.
We may have to.
So Oh, he's not up yet. We're getting standby from our producers.
Just transparency. They're going to tell us whenever the president is walking in. You've got the whole iconic, like, what is it, Mr. Speaker? I guess it would be Mr. Speaker. The president of the United States, and usually it takes on average between like 2 to 7 minutes to walk down the aisle. He like shakes a bunch of hands as the cameras will track him. We'll break in sometime around that. It is officially 9 p.m. here on the East Coast, so that is officially when the president is scheduled to talk. For those who are wondering why it's 9 p.m. and why it's past my bedtime while we're even doing this, that's because 9 p.m. is the traditional. 9 p.m. is the traditional, obviously, primetime hour here in the United States. It's the most time in which eyeballs, or at least in the old times, whenever people were watching linear TV, are glued to the screen.
Yes.
Part of the reason why that they do it here at 9 p.m.
Yes, and we can see right now, I see Pete talking to people, Joe Manchin, whatever. Anyway, they're all milling around talking, waiting for the president to come. But one thing I wanted to bring up before the speech, because this will undoubtedly be part of this is last year at the State of the Union, this was right after Russia had invaded Ukraine. This was obviously an incredibly important focus of the speech. And it will continue to be, I'm sure, an incredibly important focus of the speech. And one, critical political dividing line that is emerging is you have Trump really putting himself not just oppositional to Biden, but also to some of the other Republicans who might contest him in the primary, in terms of saying, he said no tanks, I would make a deal on the first day of my presidency, et cetera, et cetera. So you have him trying to seize, Marshall, on the Ukraine war as a sort of key dividing line for him within the Republican primary, but also for a potential general election. Yeah,
I think the interesting thing about it's kind of amazing we made it almost an hour without bringing up Ukraine. Look, I think the Ukraine war matters so obviously, like, the Ukraine war matters, but we're talking in terms of party politics here. Mm-hmm. The Ukraine war is an important, within the Republican Party primary fight. It just right now, in terms of where things are right now, is just not going to be a big defining general election issue. This is one which we also saw in terms of the midterm results. The status quo as things are right now is not one where the 2024 election is determined by what's happening in Ukraine. It is going to be an opportunity for Trump, because when Trump's talking about the peace deal, he's not really fighting against Joe Biden as much as trying to signal subtly. You're sort of seeing talk of this, Saagar, I'm sure you've noticed this, that Ron DeSantis is actually much more hawkish on foreign policy when he's led on. And you actually know this is almost certainly true because he doesn't talk about it. DeSantis has basically almost we could all know DeSantis' positions on basically everything except for kind of China, beyond separate from cultural issues. So the TikTok stuff, we actually don't know where he's at when it comes to issues like Taiwan. We don't know where he's at when it comes to Ukraine, which is strong evidence he's actually much more to the more traditional Republican Party viewpoint.
To back that up, Trump has retruthed at least one or two things, calling DeSantis a globalist on Ukraine. He has taken some pot shots at him on there. I actually agree, which is one of the things that what I think Trump is fantastic at is saying the politically popular thing that nobody wants to say from a political correctness point of view. Right now, he literally is the only major national figure on the other side of Ukraine. Although, look, let's be honest, he's been all over the place calling for bombing the Chinese planes, my personal favorite one that he's always had out there. What would he actually do in the event of all this, and should he get elected? I have no idea. By the way, history suggests that he would be... Yeah.
Well, this is what's interesting though. Like, I just want to push back a bit on you saying it's like unclear whether it's the politically popular thing to do.
Yeah, it's actually not. It's not popular
right now.
Yeah,
right now, like it's good.
Well, no, I don't think that's true. It's exactly 50-50.
But the point is, I think it's kind of so. I guess it depends what we're trying to say here, because from my perspective, we arm the Ukrainians. We don't put American boots in the ground. That's the majority position right now.
That's actually, in terms of the way the debate is being framed, that's not really how it's looking right now. In terms of the actual 50-50 polling.
So
what's the polling?
It's for 50-50 for all continual aid to Ukraine from here on out. So
what I would say is
that's very popular to give aid to Ukraine.
But the key thing though, Saagar, that's not the debate anymore. Like the Republican Party is like it controls the House. Like you're not going to see massive packages. Because
Marshall, we gotta pull out of this because the president is actually coming in now. So let's go ahead, guys, and we'll throw here to the president. We'll watch this. We're gonna debate.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress, by the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader. You're the majority leader. About that much bigger? Yeah, well, I tell you what. I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threat to the Civil War, and today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, we're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I say I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. It came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it's important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president. From reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think folks, you all are as informed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not no one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs move overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. And along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. He really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. A near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything, from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight, they were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips, each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up, people got laid off. So did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres, literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factors. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs, because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. And it's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses, so much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be number one in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back because we came together and passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. and I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry, I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects, and I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. I went there last month with Democrats and Republicans and from both states to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. The folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America, 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We're going to buy America. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards that require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why, I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer, or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you. What are you going to get money to pay for those medical bills? Or you're going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it. I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, we're taking on powerful interests to bring healthcare costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It costs the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Package it and all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed a law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. People are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes who need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Folks, and Big Pharma is still going to do very well, I promise y'all. I promise you they're going to do very well. This law also caps, and won't even go into effect until 2025, out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors on Medicare at a maximum of $2,000 a year. You don't have to pay more than $2,000 a year, no matter how much your drug costs are. Because you know why? You all know it. Many of you, like many in my family, have cancer. You know the drugs can range from $10,000, $11,000, $14,000, $15,000 for the cancer drugs. If drug prices rise faster than inflation, drug companies are going to have to pay Medicare back the difference. We're finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Bringing down prescription drug costs doesn't just save seniors money, it cuts the federal deficit by billions of dollars, by hundreds of billions of dollars. Because these prescription drugs are drugs purchased by Medicare to keep their commitment to the seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm not going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach, that's okay, that's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year. Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of prescription drugs, I will veto it. Look, I'm pleased to say that more Americans have health insurance now than ever in history. A record 16 million people are enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And thanks to the law I signed last year, saving millions are saving $800 a year on their premiums. And by the way, that law was written and the benefit expires in 2025. So my plea to some of you, at least in this audience, let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. Expand coverage of Medicaid. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. Lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited the devastating aftermath of record floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires from Arizona to Mexico to all the way up to the Canadian border. More timber has been burned, as I've observed from helicopters, than the entire state of Missouri. And we don't have global warming? Not a problem. In addition to emergency recovery, from Puerto Rico to Florida to Idaho, we're rebuilding for the long term. New electric grids that are able to weather major storms and not prevent those forest fires. Roads and water systems withstand the next big flood. Clean energy to cut pollution and create jobs in communities often left behind. We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat. We have an obligation, not to ourselves, but to our children and grandchildren, to confront it. I'm proud of how America at last is stepping up to the challenge. We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. And we pay for these investments in our future by finally making the wealthiest and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share. Just begin. Look, I'm a capitalist. But pay your fair share. I think a lot of you at home agree with me and many people that you know. The tax system is not fair. It is not fair. Look, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. God love them. 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. And let me be crystal clear. I said at the very beginning, under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do. We have to reward work, not just wealth. Pass my proposal for the billionaire minimum tax. You know, there's 1,000 billionaires in America. It's up from about 600 in the beginning of the term. But no billionaire should be paying a lower tax rate than a school teacher or firefighter. Well, I mean it. Think about it. I mean, look. I know you aren't enthusiastic about that, but think about it. Think about it. Have you noticed Big Oil just reported its profits, record profits? Last year they made $200 billion in the midst of a global energy crisis. I think it's outrageous. Why? They invested too little of that profit to increase domestic production. And when I talk to a couple of them, they say, we're afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells and all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade, and that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it. Production. If they had, in fact, invested in the production to keep gas prices down, instead, they used the record profits to buy back their own stock, rewarding the CEOs and shareholders. Corporations ought to do the right thing. That's why I propose we quadruple the tax on corporate stock buybacks and encourage long-term investments. They'll still make considerable profit. Let's finish the job and close the loopholes that allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Instead of cutting the number of audits for wealthy taxpayers, I just signed a law to reduce the deficit by $114 billion by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. That's being fiscally responsible. In the last 2 years, my administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster in the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be spent. All right. We're good. We got unanimity. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for millions of seniors. Americans have to pay into them from the very first paycheck they started. So tonight, let's all agree, and we apparently are. Let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We'll not cut Social Security. We will not cut Medicare. Those benefits belong to the American people. They earned it. And if anyone tries to cut Social Security, which apparently no one's going to do, and if anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But apparently it's not going to be a problem. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it. Let's sit down together and discuss our mutual plans together. Let's do that. I can tell you, the plan I'm going to show you is going to cut the deficit by another $2 trillion. And it won't cut a single bit of Medicare or Social Security. In fact, we're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about tonight, by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share. Look. Here's the deal. They aren't just taking advantage of the tax code. They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars because they can finally get a hearing aid over the counter without a prescription. Look, capitalism without competition is not capitalism. It's extortion. It's exploitation. Last year, I cracked down with the help of many of you on foreign shipping companies that were making you pay higher prices for every good coming into the country. I signed a bipartisan bill to cut shipping costs by 90%, helping American farmers, businessmen, and consumers. Let's finish the job. Pass the bipartisan legislation to strengthen antitrust enforcement and prevent big online platforms from giving their own products an unfair advantage. My administration is also taking on junk fees, those hidden surcharges too many companies use to make you pay more. For example, we're making airlines show you the full ticket price up front, refund your money if your flight is canceled or delayed. We've reduced exorbitant bank overdrafts by saving consumers more than $1 billion a year. We're cutting credit card late fees by 75%, from $30 to $8. Look, junk fees may not matter to the very wealthy, but they matter to most other folks in homes like the one I grew up in, like many of you did. They add up to hundreds of dollars a month. They make it harder for you to pay your bills or afford that family trip. I know how unfair it feels when a company overcharges you and gets away with it. Not anymore. We've written a bill to stop it all. It's called the Junk Fee Prevention Act. We're going to ban surprise resort fees that hotels charge on your bill. Those fees can cost you up to $90 a night at hotels that aren't even resorts. The idea that cable, internet, and cell phone companies can charge you $200 or more if you decide to switch to another provider. Give me a break. We can stop service fees on tickets to concerts and sporting events and make companies disclose all the fees up front. And we'll prohibit airlines from charging $50 round trip for a family just to be able to sit together. Baggage fees are bad enough. Airlines can't treat your child like a piece of baggage. Americans are tired of being. We're tired of being played for suckers. So pass the Junk Fee Prevention Act so companies stop ripping us off. For too long, workers have been getting stiffed, but not anymore. We're beginning to restore the dignity of work. For example, I should have known this, but I didn't until 2 years ago. 30 million workers have to sign non-compete agreements for the jobs they take. 30 million. So a cashier at a burger place can't walk across town and take the same job at another burger place and make a few bucks more. It just changed. But they just changed it because we exposed it. That was part of the deal, guys. Look it up. But not anymore. We're banning those agreements so companies have to compete for workers and pay them what they're worth. And I must tell you, this is bound to get a response from my friends on my left but the right. I'm so sick and tired of companies breaking the law by preventing workers from organizing. Pass the PRO Act, because businesses have a right, workers have a right to form a union. And let's guarantee all workers have a living wage. Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care. That's going to enable millions of more people to go and stay at work. And let's restore the full child tax credit, which gave tens of millions of parents some breathing room and cut child poverty in half to the lowest level in history. And by the way, when we do all these things, we increase productivity, we increase economic growth. So let's finish the job and get more families access to affordable, quality housing. Let's get seniors who want to stay in their homes the care they need to do so. Let's give more breathing room to millions of family caregivers looking after their loved ones. Pass my plan so we get seniors and people with disabilities the home care and services they need. And support the workers who are doing God's work. These plans are fully paid for and we can afford to do them. Restoring the dignity of work means making education an affordable ticket to the middle class. You know, when we made public education, 12 years of it universal in the last century, we made the best educated, best paid, we became the best educated, best paid nation in the world. But the rest of the world's caught up. It's caught up. Jill, my wife, who teaches full time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Any nation that out-educates is going to out-compete us. Folks, we all know 12 years of education is not enough to win the economic competition of the 21st century. If you want to have the best educated workforce, let's finish the job by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. Studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school and go on to earn a 2 or 4 year degree, no matter their background they came from. Let's give public school teachers a raise. We're making progress by reducing student debt, increasing Pell Grants for working and middle-class families. Let's finish the job and connect students to career opportunities starting in high school. Provide access to 2 years of community college, the best career training in America, in addition to being a pathway to a 4-year degree. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And folks, in the midst of the COVID crisis, when schools were closed and we were shutting down everything, let's recognize how far we came in the fight against the pandemic itself. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of the American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we've broken the COVID grip on us. COVID deaths are down by 90%. We've saved millions of lives and opened up our country. We opened our country back up. And soon we'll end the public health emergency. But that's called a public health emergency. But we'll remember the toll and pain that's never going to go away. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID. 1 million. Families grieving, children orphaned, empty chairs at the dining room table constantly reminding you that she used to sit there. Remembering them, we remain vigilant. We still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts and keep America safe. And as we emerge from this crisis stronger, we're also got to double down on prosecuting criminals who stole relief money meant to keep workers and small businesses afloat. Before I came to office, you remember, during that campaign, the big issue was about inspector generals who would protect taxpayers' dollars who were sidelined. They were fired. Many people said we don't need them. And fraud became rampant. Last year, I told you the watchdogs are back. Since then, we've recovered billions of taxpayers' dollars. Now let's triple the anti-fraud strike force going after these criminals, double the statute of limitations on these crimes, and crack down on identity fraud by criminal syndicates stealing billions of dollars from the American people. And the data shows that for every dollar we put into fighting fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all people are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is violated. Joining us tonight are the parents of Tyree Nichols. Welcome. To bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, or playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. With the faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this. Imagine how much courage and care that takes. It's up to us, to all of us. We all want the same thing. Neighborhoods free of violence, law enforcement who earns the community's trust. Just as every cop, when they pin on that badge in the morning, has a right to be able to go home at night, so does everybody else out there. Our children have a right to come home safely. Equal protection under the law is a covenant we have with each other in America. We know police officers put their lives on the line every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. In one sense, we ask much too much of them. I know most cops and their families are good, decent, honorable people, the vast majority. But they risk their lives every time they put that shield on. But what happened to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. Help them succeed in keeping us safe. We also need more first responders and professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges. More resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime. More community intervention programs. More investment in housing, education, and job training. All this can help prevent violence in the first place. When police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. With the support of the families of victims, civil rights groups, and law enforcement, I signed an executive order for all federal officers, banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants, and other key elements of the George Floyd Act. Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good. And all of us, folks, it's difficult, but it's simple. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts that we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform. Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others. But we know our work is not done. Joining us tonight is Brandon Say, a 26-year-old hero. Brandon put his college dreams on hold to be at his mom's side when she was dying from cancer. And Brandon now works at the dance studio started by his grandparents. And 2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, he heard the studio door close, and he saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestle the semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all. I led the fight to do that in 1994. In 10 years, that ban was law and mass shootings went down. After we let it expire in the Republican administration, mass shootings tripled. Let's finish the job and ban these assault weapons. And let's also come together on immigration. Make it a bipartisan issue once again. We now have a record number of personnel working to secure the border, arresting 8,000 human smugglers, seizing over 23,000 pounds of fentanyl in just the last several months. We've launched a new border plan last month. Unlawful migration from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela has come down 97% as a consequence of that. But American border problems won't be fixed until Congress acts. If we don't pass my comprehensive immigration reform, at least pass my plan to provide the equipment and officers to secure the border. And a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those on temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Here in the People's House, it's our duty to protect all the people's rights and freedoms. Congress must restore the right and Congress must restore the right that was taken away in Roe v. Wade and protect Roe v. Wade. Give every woman a consular right. The Vice President and I are doing everything to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient safety. But already more than a dozen states are enforcing extreme abortion bans. Make no mistake about it. If Congress passes a national ban, I will veto it. But let's also pass the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity. Our strength is not just the example of our power, but the power of our example. Let's remember the world's watching. I spoke in this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. A murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Would we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did. And together, we did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukrainian's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, united. We're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you as long as it takes. Our nation is working for more freedom, more dignity, more peace, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger. Investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominated. Investing in our alliances and working with our allies to protect advanced technologies so they will not be used against us. Modernizing our military to safeguard stability and deter aggression. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world. And I'm committed. I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world, but make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracies have grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one. America's rallying the world to meet those challenges, from climate to global health, to food insecurity, to terrorism, to territorial aggression. Allies are stepping up, spending more, and doing more. Look, the bridges we're forming between partners in the Pacific and those in the Atlantic, and those who bet against America are learning how wrong they are. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. Never. Well, when I came to office, most assured that bipartisanship assumed was impossible, but never believed it. That's why a year ago I offered a unity agenda to the nation as I stood here. We made real progress together. We passed a law making it easy for doctors to prescribe effective treatments for opioid addiction. We passed the gun safety law, making historic investments in mental health. We launched the ARPA-H drive for breakthrough in the fights against cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and so much more. We passed the Heath Robinson PACT Act, named after the late Iraq War veteran whose story about exposure to toxic burn kits I shared here last year. I understand something about those burn pits, but there's so much more to do. We can do it together. Joining us tonight is a father named Doug from Newton, New Hampshire. He wrote Jill, my wife, a letter, and me as well, about his courageous daughter, Courtney. A contagious laugh, his sister's best friend, her sister's best friend. He shared a story all too familiar to millions of Americans and many of you in the audience. Courtney discovered pills in high school. It spiraled into addiction and eventually death from a fentanyl overdose. She was just 20 years old. Describing the last 8 years without her, Doug said, "There's no worse pain." Yet their family has turned pain to purpose, working to end the stigma and change laws. He told us he wants to start a journey toward American recovery. Doug, we're with you. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border. Working with couriers like FedEx to inspect more packages for drugs. Strong penalties to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. Second, let's do more in mental health, especially for our children. When millions of young people are struggling with bullying, violence, trauma, we owe them greater access to mental health care at their schools. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online, ban targeted advertising to children, and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Third, let's do more to keep this nation's one truly sacred obligation to equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home. Job training, job placement for veterans and their spouses as they come to return to civilian life. Helping veterans afford the rent, because no one should be homeless in America, especially someone who served the country. Dennis McDonough is here of the VA. We had a first real discussion when I asked him to take the job. I'm glad he did. We were losing up to 25 veterans a day on suicide. Now we're losing 17 a day to the silent scourge of suicide. 17 veterans a day are committing suicide. More than all the people being killed in the wars. Folks, VA is doing everything it can, including expanding mental health screening, proven programs that recruits veterans to help other veterans understand what they're going through, get them the help they need. We got to do more. And fourth, last year, Jill and I reignited the cancer moonshot that I was able to start with President Obama asked me to lead our administration on this issue. Our goal is to cut the cancer death rates at least by 50% in the next 25 years. Turn more cancers from death sentences to treatable diseases. Provide more support for patients and their families. It's personal to so many of us in this audience. Joining us are Morris and Candice, an Irishman and the daughter of immigrants from Panama. They met and fell in love in New York City and got married in the same chapel Jill and I got married in New York City. Kindred spirits. He wrote us a letter about his little daughter, Ava, and I saw her just before I came over. She was just a year old when she was diagnosed with rare kidney disease, cancer. After 26 blood transfusions, 11 rounds of radiation, 8 rounds of chemo, 1 kidney removed, giving a 5% survival rate. He wrote how in the darkest moments he thought, if she goes, I can't stay. Many of you have been through that as well. Jill and I understand that like so many of you. And he read Jill's book describing our family's cancer journey and how we tried to steal moments of joy where we could with Bo. For them, that glimmer of joy was the half smile of their baby girl. It meant everything to them. They never gave up hope. Little Ava never gave up hope. She turns 4 next month. They just found out Ava's beating the odds, is on her way to being cured of cancer. And she's watching from the White House tonight, and she's not asleep already. For the lives we can save. For the lives we can save and the lives we've lost, let this be a truly American moment that rallies the country and the world together and proves that we can still do big things. 20 years ago, under the leadership of President Bush and countless advocates and champions, he undertook a bipartisan effort through PEPFAR to transform the global fight against HIV/AIDS. It's been a huge success. He thought big, he thought large, he moved. I believe we can do the same thing with cancer. Let's end cancer as we know it. Cure some cancers once and for all. Folks, there's one reason why we've been able to do all of these things. Our democracy itself. It's the most fundamental thing of all. With democracy, everything's possible. Without it, nothing is. For the last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie assailed and unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th. Here tonight in this chamber is a man who bears the scars of that brutal attack, but is as tough and as strong, as resilient as they get. My friend Paul Pelosi. Paul, stand up. But such a heinous act should have never happened. We must all speak out. There's no place for political violence in America. We have to protect the right to vote, not suppress that fundamental right. Honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We have to uphold the rule of law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment where they have been called to protect our democracy, defend it, stand up for it. And this is our moment. My fellow Americans, we meet tonight at an inflection point, one of those moments that only a few generations ever face, where the direction we now take is going to decide the course of this nation for decades to come. We're not bystanders of history. We're not powerless before the forces that confront us. It's within our power of we, the people. We're facing the test of our time. We have to be the nation we've always been at our best, optimistic, hopeful, forward-looking. A nation that embraces light over dark, hope over fear, unity over division, stability over chaos. We have to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We're good people. The only nation in the world built on an idea, the only one. Other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity, but we're the only nation based on an idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God. A nation that stands as a beacon to the world. A nation in a new age of possibilities. So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. Because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong. I'm not new to this place. I stand here tonight having served as long as about any one of you have ever served here. But I've never been more optimistic about our future, about the future of America. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
All right, you have, of course, been listening to the President of the United States delivering his State of the Union, leaning heavily into an economic message front and center at the top. But I think probably the thing a lot of people will pay the most attention to is how raucous the Republicans were. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling, "You're a liar," lots of especially over his comments about Social Security and Medicare. There's a big uproar. They were yelling at him about the border and other things. Kyle, let me go to you. First of all, what were your sort of big takeaways, big impressions?
Well, I like the fact that most of the speech was economic and the early part was economic. I feel like that, you know, if you lean into that, that's positive and that'll get a good reaction, I think. But obviously, yeah, the bigger story is how, I'll go with the word annoying, how annoying the room was, and I'm very curious to throw it to you guys. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting old. I don't know if it's because I'm tired and it's past my bedtime, but every single time somebody chirped up, I was like, shut up. Just wrap it up. I don't want to hear it. It's annoying. He's speaking. He's the president. Even if he wasn't the president, if he was Bob from the PTA meeting, it's like, let Bob finish his thought. Because they're all just trying to get a viral moment. They're all just trying to fundraise off it because of the Joe Wilson moment back when Obama was president, and he screamed, "You lie," and he had massive fundraising numbers. It's like, I get it, I get it, I get it. You're all virtue signaling. You're all trying to get, you know, the spotlight on you. But it's dumb and it's annoying. Do you guys agree with me?
I'm not so sure. Here's the thing. In terms of my objective feelings about, or in terms of my personal feelings about it, I'm indifferent different. If anything, I actually do kind of enjoy it just because I like the idea of a raucous House of Representatives. That said, look, if it's all fake and it's all a stage, then these people are going to have to play their part, right? You pointed to that. Marjorie knows exactly what she's doing. She's absolutely going to raise a lot of money. But I would even step back. I don't think that was the biggest story that's going to come out of that. It might be a 24-hour thing, and some people will be like, oh, my God, my norms. Guys, the biggest story, the takeaway, is whenever he was confronting them directly on Medicare and Social Security. I mean, in terms of in terms of what we will be talking about probably for weeks now, that moment is going to get replayed over and over again when he's like, okay, are we all agreed here? Oh, so you agree with me, so it's not going to be a problem. Stand up if you agree with me. That was actually, look, I'll give the man credit. That was the best absolute part of the speech. It was the only part where he went off script and it did actually work for him.
Yeah.
There were a couple where what did he say? Name a man who would trade places with Xi Jinping. I still do not know exactly what that means. All right, so like my meta takeaway, I was telling you guys this during the speech, vast majority of people stopped watching the State of the Union after about 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
The first 30 to 45 minutes was all an economic message. Most of it was made in America. I mean, look, not even President Obama ever gave a made in America speech like that. And to me, that just shows me the way that Donald Trump really changed politics forever on made in America and on China. So those two issues, it's solidly in this State of the Union. No president even almost disagrees now at that point. So for the Medicare and the Social Security, and then I thought overall it was an effective speech as far as Biden ones goes. If I were him, you know, I'd be pretty happy with my performance.
Marshall, I want to get your thoughts. I sort of feel like with the Republican interruptions, et cetera, Biden really led with this message of like bipartisanship and unity. He made a long show at the beginning of saying, congratulations to Kevin McCarthy. Congratulations to Mitch McConnell. We're going to work together. We did work together in the past. So he wanted this message of like, I'm the guy who's here to work with anybody. We've gotten some things done together, et cetera. And so it certainly serves Marjorie Taylor Greene's and whoever else's interest to get their little viral moments for their Republican-based fundraising. But I also do feel like that sort of plays into Biden's hands as well when he's trying to portray himself as the grown-up in the room and the one that's serious about actually reaching out and getting things done.
Yeah, it's what we were talking about at the start of the real live show here, which is that voters like hearing that. You know, like you could obviously, I think it's important to separate the like annoying DC version of like, oh, back in the 80s, everything was super chill and everyone was best friends, the Gipper and Tip O'Neill, like that, the Joe Scarborough thing. But like at a baseline level, the centerpiece of American politics right now is what like suburban moderate voters think, and they want to hear that. Marjorie Taylor Greene's district may be interested in her doing that performance, but no one else is. And that's a real misjudgment that could be effective in 2024.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, let's step back. What did we say at the top? Or at least for what I said the balance is economy, lead yourself, try to gaslight a little bit about, oh, everything's great, you know, all of that. At the same time, you're like, I'm a bulwark against. So what did he lead with? He goes, here's all the things I've done. Goes straight into the bulwark against Medicare, Social Security. I will veto. And what does he end on? He ends exactly on stop the steal. Now, look, saying the Paul Pelosi attack had anything to do with, quote, the big lie and not schizophrenia is ridiculous. However, politically savvy move, I think, to try and tie.
Pay attention to what people say. So
right, yeah. So it's like one of those where, listen, you know, you tie those two things together, and you know, it's savvy, I think, in that regard. You end on the democracy thing that really kept people there. So look, I think he hit all the notes. It clocked in at around an hour, 15 minutes. As State of the Unions go, that's pretty average. I mean, overall, again, I just come back to, I'm like, effective job. I really think so.
So. One of the things I jotted down a bunch of the stuff that I thought was most interesting. One of my favorite lines was he was talking about the 15% minimum tax rate for corporations worth over $1 billion, and he says they have to pay a minimum of 15%, and then he said, like, kind of casually and flippantly, God love them.
Yeah,
and that got a decent laugh, and you know, I was chuckling here. I thought that was a good line. I noticed early on, one of the very first lines was like, we've created 12 million jobs, and then everybody starts clapping, and Kevin McCarthy sitting there like,
Yeah.
I will not clap at 12 million new jobs. It's like, dude, this is one of the ones that it's like you have to do it just to look like you're sane. And then, like you were pointing out, the Social Security and Medicare moment there. What I was getting really annoyed by is like, just own it. It is a lot of the Republicans' position that they want to cut it. They might soften the language to try to blunt the effect by saying, no, we're just trying to reform it or save it. But functionally, they want to cut it. And when he says that's what they want to do, and they're like, boo, 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 it strikes me as so disingenuous. Like, just say, yes, this is our position, and we would like to debate that on the merits, and we would like to defend the position of cutting Social Security. They get so weaselly about it, and that's what was driving me crazy. I was screaming about it here in the studio when we were watching it.
So the thing that he's referring to specifically when he talks about like sunsetting these provisions was what Senator Rick Scott, who was in charge of the Republican senatorial campaigns this time around, so not like an insignificant player, it was part of the plan that he put out. And this was, Mitch McConnell was basically like, shut the F up. We don't want to talk about that. We're trying to run on nothing here and just like bash them on inflation. So this is not without basis. And you've had other Republicans also talking about the debt ceiling, talking about cuts to entitlements. You have had some others who say, no, we don't want to do that. Donald Trump obviously said, like, this is off the table. But what's sort of more interesting to me is I feel like in previous eras, in the Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan era, they were much more comfortable owning the fact that they really wanted to cut Social Security and Medicare. Like if Obama had said that at a State of the Union, they would have been like, yes, we do, and here's our plan, and here's Paul Ryan with the PowerPoint of how he's going to do it. And so, I mean, this is another way that even though you still have a lot of the same ideology, even though many of them still are committed to it, would like to cut Social Security and Medicare, et cetera, the fact that they're offended that this is suggested about them, that they want to cut these programs, represents a pretty remarkable shift in terms of the Republican Party and what they want to publicly put forward.
What do you think of that, Marshall?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Krystal. I mean, the core thing, as you guys are articulating, this really reminds me of the defund the police debate in terms of like how you could identify a vulnerable area. So think of defund back in 2020. There were some Democrats who were very defund. There were plenty of moderate Democrats who weren't vulnerable. You can take the more extreme position as the party's trying to figure it out, and that's as an attack point. And that's basically what's happening with Social Security. Back in the 2000s, like think of when George W. Bush tried to reform /cut/privatize Social Security after he won re-election in 2005. Like back then, the party consensus was that this is what we do. We fight against the New Deal. We're fighting against the Great Society. That's our party. After the Social Security privatization failed, after Paul Ryan flopped as a VP, and then after Trump then ran in favor of Social Security and in favor of Medicare, Medicare. Also, we need to add the failure of the repeal of Obamacare. Republicans genuinely don't know what to think. And I think as you see, and the thing that's funny, Kyle, I get your point about needing to have a fair debate, and I agree with you most of the time, but like J.D. Vance, for example, J.D. Vance like actually wouldn't be in favor of cutting Social Security.
He came out into what you said.
I don't think he's the vast majority. I don't think he's the majority of the party, but especially with younger Republicans who are basically grown up in an America that's accepted the New Deal, that's accepted Social Security, it's actually not quite clear what the actual position is, which is why it's perfect for Joe Biden to attack in that direction.
I completely agree with that characterization. The defund is exactly right, which is one of those, they're like, no, what we want to do is raise the retirement age. And it's like, well, okay, well, you're still, when you're already within that heuristic, it's like, it's not going to be good for you. Just so people know, cutting Social Security and Medicare is probably up there with defund the police and affirmative action as the least popular things that you could actually try and do in politics, hence why he beats him over the head with the club with it, which is exactly what I would do. I was surprised that he didn't mention abortion more in the speech. My count was a single line. It came, let's say, like 2/3 or so into that. I was pretty shocked by that, actually. That's something I would have led with if I was President Biden.
So I just want to say, look, I hope I'm wrong, but we just saw with this whole fight with getting Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker, there was a whole fight, and there was a right flank that was pushing back against him. And one of the things they settled on is we're going to have a debt ceiling showdown. And our whole position in the debt ceiling showdown is we want to force cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So I think the overwhelming majority of the party is going to be on board with that. Now, whether or not, I hope Biden is telling the truth when he's like, I'm not going to do some sort of grand bargain. I'm not going to cut it at all. But I think the predominant position in the Republican Party is let's cut it.
Well, I'm not so sure because remember, there's only 17 people, right, who tried to extract that. Those are like the Tea Party, Freedom Caucus diehards. Look, the majority, I genuinely have no idea. I do not know. If you were to ask me my gut feeling, I think most of them would say what I said, something around like they want to raise the retirement age. But of course, we don't.
But that's cutting. That's the cutting.
No.
Yeah.
I agree with you. What I'm saying is like that is what I think most of them.
They don't want their position to be characterized as cutting Social Security and Medicare.
Disingenuous.
And that's different.
Like, that's the line they're going to go with.
Right. But that is, even just them not wanting their position to be characterized that way is very different.
Oh,
and of course, the fact that, I mean, Joe Biden was part of the Obama administration that actually put a deal on the table that would have cut Social Security. And now and he, over the course of his career, a number of times talked about cutting Social Security. So it does show you the way that the politics around this issue have clearly shifted. Now, one thing I think that's really important to say is that in terms of the big money institutions within the Republican Party, like the think tanks and, the Koch industry, the Koch network, they still are very much looking for every opportunity they can possibly find to cut these programs, and that matters a lot.
I think they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to like piss on people and say it's raining. So they want to do the debt ceiling thing, force the cuts, and then go, we're not, we're just reforming it, we're saving it. So that's their game. That's what their game has been for a long time. So I think that's the goal. It's not like they're actually becoming more moderate on it because they're afraid to acknowledge what their actual position is.
They recognize how toxic and terrible the politics are for them. They recognize that they cannot be out and out being like, yes, we want to cut Social Security, because they have realized that that is devastating for them. I want to pick up, Saagar, on what you were saying, because that was something I noted too. In advance, you were saying like, okay, here's the formula. Yes, economics, but clearly the Stop the Steal stuff and January 6th and abortion, like that's what won the midterm. So he's going to lean into that. He really didn't. He closed with democracy. Yep. He closed with January 6th. Paul Pelosi with abortion was also in the latter part of the speech. But the part that really counts in terms of what they're, focused on and what the message they want to take away, it really was loaded up with economics. And I was also surprised that you had very little mention of abortion ultimately in this speech. I mean, the two themes that he leaned into very heavily to start with was this idea of like, I'm the guy who can work with anyone, bipartisanship, let's get things done for the American people, and then laying out the case of what he thinks he's delivered and what he still wants to do. Now, one challenge for him is the fact that we were looking at a poll before the speech. Very few people say they feel like they've been impacted by the Biden agenda. So, whereas I think if you're overselling the economy and the rosy picture of the economy, you're going to have a hard time. There probably is some benefit you can get just from selling, here's the things we did, and going down the list and trying to persuade people that, no, actually, we have been doing some stuff. What do you think, Marshall?
Yeah, I think it's, I just want to go back to a quick thing you said about the lack of focus on the abortion and the democracy thing. Like, maybe, I think this kind of goes to my early comment about how I'd be curious about Joe Biden's like political analysis here. And it seems to me the political analysis is that you need to move on from 2022. Like, you're going to reach those heights, you're going to be successful that midterm, but maybe that's just not going to be successful running on that retread when it comes to 2023. Like, there could be an instinct of like, man, we're going to still, like, you're still talking about that. Like, it's not up for grabs as much. So yeah, I'm really curious how the right responds to the economic stuff, especially, Saagar, to your point about how Biden and Team Biden are clearly taking the like made in America, compete with China bit that Trump added. So that, especially given the, I think, attempt to bring things back to culture wars, is going to be an interesting shift there.
Yeah, I already know what they're going to do. They're going to go culture war, they're going to criticize him on the border, and they're just not going to talk about econ because that's how it goes. Anyway, Kyle, let's get our last thoughts from you before we bring in Ryan and Emily.
Sure, yeah. So I wanted to point out the fentanyl line from Biden. So he's over there talking about fentanyl, and you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and others that start screaming at him. And I heard somebody say China.
Yes.
And then somebody say, like, it's your fault or something like that?
To be fair, the vast majority of the fentanyl comes from China. So that's
okay, I know, I understand that. But I always get super triggered over this because I feel like the approach from many people is just brain dead. Because Krystal and I have talked about this. about 30,000 people a year died from overdoses when it was the pain pills. Then we cracked down on the pain pills with all the good intentions in the world, and then people went to the black market and they got heroin. Some of that heroin was laced with fentanyl, and now we have about 100,000 people dying every year. So it's this like the tyranny of good intentions in a sense, because if I were to tell somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, hey man, we need to legalize, tax, and regulate drugs in order to get past this whole fentanyl crisis, she'd be like, you're insane. That would add to the problem.
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think it's also a fair point to say, like, there is a lot of fentanyl coming across the border, and from what I've seen, they've said that actually if you did at least have some more enforcement that was happening there, it would make it much harder and raise the price, which would increase actually the amount of pure heroin. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing. What I'm saying is it's complicated. I also would remind you, we have to talk about what's in the realm of the possible, and in that, what was it, in the polling data that we had there, which one is that if we have that element? Is that A3? Can we go ahead and put that up there on the screen? Pew Research, I think cracking down on illegal drugs was at like 57%. So, I mean, the public is just not there whenever it comes to
no, I understand that,
like legalizing drugs. Yeah, there it is. Reducing the availability of illegal drugs is right there at 53%.
Biden also doesn't get credit, though, when Biden gets a lot of shots from his left on the border because he's continued a lot of the Trump policies on the border. So he does a lot of the things Trump has done, and it's not like anybody on the right goes, hey, we agree with you on this one, fella.
Well,
they
you're
just
talking
act like
about
he's not doing it. They act like he's in favor of open borders or something.
Well, you're talking about migrants, and to be fair, his administration has tried to end a majority of those policies in court, and it's only after they weren't able to end those administration policies in court that they ended up keeping them. So
actually,
I think that's
they not only kept them, they expanded them.
Well, then they expanded them. After they tried to kill it in the court, then they decided.
And also, there has been a lot of fentanyl seizures at the border. There's been a number of them.
There's been some. I mean, they're also
the idea that he's like not trying to see. My point is, look, we can keep going round and round in circles trying to do the same policy that's not working, or we can do the actual solution. But she's not interested in a real solution. She's interested in yelling at Biden in the middle of a speech when he's talking about a very serious issue like fentanyl.
I don't think
he needs to get serious on it, and she needs to get serious on it too.
I don't think anyone on this stream has claimed Marjorie is interested in a real solution.
And neither is Biden. Neither is Biden.
She's a difference maker.
It's just like
she's
also,
there.
We perhaps can close this out with something that will unify us in the spirit of what Joe Biden wanted to bring, which is both Kyrsten Sinema and Marjorie Taylor Greene apparently dressed like it was the Hunger Games.
Yes. What is going on?
Kyrsten Sinema wearing some yellow Big Bird ass looking thing. People all kinds of memes, and Marjorie Taylor Greene in some white fur.
Yeah, she looks like from Lion the Witch in the fucking wardrobe. I mean, look, I'm gonna break my cursing thing. This is driving me insane. What the fuck is going on? Like, Kyrsten Sinema literally is dressing like she's going to the goddamn Met Gala after presiding over the Senate in a T-shirt with a heart on it. She is solely responsible for breaking a lot of the female dress code that is there, and I blame her for Marjorie looking like she's literally in the Hunger Games or Lion the Witch. I am losing my goddamn mind over here over the collapse of dress code. Go ahead, Marshall. What'd you say?
If we're gonna rank, I think we have to say George Santos' orange tie isn't great.
Yes.
I think Marjorie. Let me put it this way. I think Marjorie is more compelling than Kyrsten Sinema is. Let me put it this way. Like, if Marjorie showed up in yoga pants and a T-shirt and you met her at a coffee shop, she would still have a lot of main character energy to her. I clearly think Kyrsten Sinema is someone who accessorizes to make up for the fact that she's just bleh. So
boring.
I think that's insightful.
Commentary.
Insightful commentary.
Okay, everybody stick with us. Just give us 5 minutes. We're going to switch the chairs out. We're going to have Ryan and Emily in here. Thank you all so much for your support. Control room, let's throw the graphic up there, and we'll start
Marshall
the
and
transition
Kyle,
process.
thanks, guys.
Marshall, Kyle, you guys
Thanks,
did a fantastic job.
Thanks for
you.
listening.
Okay, we're back. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. Look at that wide shot. We got Ryan and Emily here. We got Counterpoints, which is in the house. Yeah, lots of headroom. If this were any other time, we would be doing a little bit of camera adjustment. But this is what it looks like when it's live. When we have a brand new, beautiful studio that you premium subs are helping us with, it will be different, we promise. Okay, so people have heard us talk a little bit now. Ryan, Emily, you guys watch the speech with us. What do you guys think? Ryan, you go first.
All right. I mean, the thing that's most important to me about this is that it is the launch of his presidential campaign.
Yep. Right.
Yep.
So you're really not going to make a whole lot of policy, and you're not going to make a lot of, you're not going to move the needle on public opinion and really on the ground or in the room, except for that Medicare thing and so Medicare and Social Security thing, which was absolutely remarkable.
Yes.
We want to talk more about that in a minute. But if this is what he's going to run on, this is kind of exciting. Like this is a party that like working people could get behind. I mean, what did he talk about? He talked about supporting organized labor, pass the PRO Act, go after big pharma. We're going to address climate change. He said we're going to cap insulin prices.
Billionaire tax.
Medicare and Social Security, billionaire tax. We're going to bust up monopolies and all the different fees. I'm going to a resort, and it's not even a resort, and I'm paying a resort fee. But
that seemed very personal.
He stays at his friend's house.
That was
for
clearly
free.
personal.
That's how, I don't,
yes,
he's never encountered
and his
this tax.
friend charged him a resort fee.
Good point.
But so so you can and he's going for the identity theft and some funny stuff like that. Like people are getting to him.
Yeah.
But in general, that's a platform that people could get behind. It's strange.
It was a lot of Matt Stoller was very excited because he's talking about antitrust. What was it? First president?
The first president since 1979 to mention antitrust.
To mention antitrust. You're talking about industrial policy. You're talking about
making
big pharma,
things in America.
Making things in America. And then, I mean, I'm not big on this whole squishy, like, bipartisan comedy, whatever. But there are a lot of people who are really into that. That's a very normie sentiment of, like, why can't we all just come together and get some things done? What I said earlier, Emily, and I want to get your thoughts on the whole thing, though, is I think the fact that you had this sort of ugly raucousness from the Republicans in there really did kind of play into Biden's hands of looking like the grown-up in the room.
He looked in control too. He was almost like engaging with the crowd. He let them finish. He wasn't heckling them back. He let them finish. So I think optically that's 100% correct. That did not work in the way that, let's say, Marjorie Taylor Greene or whomever else was involved in it wanted it to work. That said, to Ryan's point, and actually Kyle made this point too, he gave a speech that was so front-loaded on economics, and that's really smart. If you're Biden's speechwriters, you should be really happy with how this turned out. He's sort of checking down, going through the laundry list, and fleshing out, actually, not just listing off, but fleshing out things like infrastructure, things like the CHIPS Act. Now, to the bipartisanship point, I think that's a fascinating point because it works with people until the country stops working.
Yep.
Because he had a line earlier where he talked about basically decades of hollowing out the middle class. Who was in the Senate? Who was the senator from MasterCard with identity theft? For decades
I brought that up.
hollowing
I agree.
out the middle class. I mean, it's just like, so that's a real problem for Biden. And I think he has never had a real answer to confronting it head on politically.
Right.
But tacking in that direction, it's not just good news for Democrats, it's good news for the country that Republicans, at least optically, were so vehemently offended by what Joe Biden said with Social Security and Medicare, because they said, Kevin McCarthy gave his whole speech last night, it's off the table, it's off the table. That's good news for the country because it tells you where the Overton window is.
You know what's funny? I'm monitoring the professional press corps. What are they all talking about? Decorum in the House. I'm like, who cares about the decorum? Like, look, I'm not saying it isn't a thing, but Social Security, people, Medicare, that is going to define the next couple of months of our politics. It's driving me nuts. And like, that was the first thing I zeroed in on. I was like, man, that's a big moment. That is going to be every ad, the Biden ad, the launch. I'm the one who protected it. I will veto the bill. Krystal picking up on the fact that Republicans are not willing to go there. Yet this also puts Trump on the back foot where he's like, no, they're lying that we don't want to cut Social Security, but he doesn't have a unified coalition. I'm like, this is it. This is the whole ball game, Ryan. So what else do you want to dig into on that?
And for decades on the left, there's been this internal argument. Do you work within the Democratic Party to try to make the Democratic Party a better thing, or do you work outside it, you start a third party and try to pressure them from there? As the working class is kind of being divided by between the two parties here, a kind of new answer is emerging, which is that you actually work within both parties. And Joe Biden did that tonight. Like, I've never seen a speech like that kind of change the negotiating table, change the game in the way it did. Before this speech, Republicans had their game plan for when it came to the debt ceiling crisis. You know, they're going to hold it hostage. They're going to force Biden to the table. They're going to get some cuts, and then they're going to agree to it the same way that they jammed Biden up 10 years ago. They come out of this speech with nothing left.
Right.
Like, so, what are they? Okay, well, now what are you going to do? You're not cutting military spending because you're Republicans. Right. Now you can't cut Social Security and Medicare because you just told the whole country that he's a liar and that you would never do such a thing. So you're left with the EPA and like NOAA, and the BLM. They can cut BLM and tell their base that it's Black Lives Matter. And actually, they can trim the Bureau of Land Management.
I was going to say, leave Clyde Bundy alone, right? I'm just gonna,
He's going to fly back for that meeting and defend his budget.
Well, I do, to your point, because they obviously took great umbrage at the suggestion that they wanted to cut Social Security, Medicare.
They would never do such a thing.
No, they want to save it.
They want to save it.
They want to strengthen it.
Right, exactly. But I mean, the numbers just don't work out. Like, the math just doesn't work out. If you're like, I want to slash the budget by this huge amount, right, which they do and which they've said publicly, but I don't want to touch Social Security, Medicaid, like, it just literally doesn't.
Or the Pentagon.
Or the Pentagon. If you put those together, like, it's not going to work out for you. And so that's why it is a fair hit to say to them, like, no, you want to hold the debt ceiling hostage. You want to cut these programs. You have a track record of wanting to cut these programs. Senator Rick Scott said you want to cut these programs. And it was pretty remarkable to see how much they freaked out about that.
And a good sign, though, again, because this is post-Paul Ryan politics, and Republicans have realized, I mean, you can cut the entire Pentagon. This is per Brian Riedel at the Manhattan Institute. You could literally get rid of the Department of Defense, and you can't balance the entitlement balance sheet in the way that Republicans say that they want to. And there's a reckoning with that on the right now. That doesn't mean that Mitch McConnell wouldn't love to get his hands on and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. But I think it's at least sort of becoming, and again, I think this is good for the American people. You have J.D. Vance, Donald Trump coming out and saying the same thing, and setting the tone. You have Russ Vought, who's hugely influential in the new right and in Republican politics. His entire plan to balance the budget, he was OMB under Trump, is don't touch Social Security and Medicaid. You can get rid of, to the point that you guys were making, all of the woke policies. And you don't have to. You can balance the budget in 10 years without touching anything else. And just the fact that the wheels are in motion on that tells you that Republicans are like, no, we literally cannot even whisper a word about it. And if it comes out of your mouth, we are putting you in the corner.
That's a really interesting point. We got Marshall and Kyle's reaction. I was curious for your guys' reaction. So right now, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is giving her rebuttal. I don't know who's watching it, but we have an excerpt, and I think the excerpt is important more so in what's not in it and what is in it and what the case of what the potential Republican pushback against this is going to be. I'll just read this again. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. You get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves. Our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. And while you reap the consequences of your failure, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality that Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. We are under attack in a left-wing culture war that we didn't start, and we never wanted to fight. Emily, what did you think of the strategy there to really go hard at the culture war? And to be fair, she didn't actually watch the speech before she released that excerpt. So clearly, but I mean, that's kind of how all these things work. You get a predetermined little fact sheet and all that. What do you think of that strategy? That's
a really good study in contrasts, I think, because she expects Biden to come out, which is wrong. I mean, it's a good example of how Republicans are disconnected from the Biden that they're actually fighting, as opposed to the straw man. And then it's not to say that Biden isn't doing stuff in the culture war. Of course he is, sort of bureaucratically in the executive branch.
That's in the DOJ, right? You know, that's not a national name.
Right, and the education department and all of these things that people aren't necessarily able to follow on a single day-to-day basis. But that Sarah Huckabee Sanders comes out anticipating a Biden culture war speech, and what she gets is something like what Stoller points out, the first president to champion antitrust reform in a State of the Union since 1979. I haven't seen the full Sarah Huckabee Sanders speech yet, but man, is that going to miss the mark if Biden is out there talking about increasing manufacturing, increasing jobs, decreasing unemployment, and all of these economic metrics. she said the choice is between normal and or crazy. This is a quote I just saw from Twitter. Republicans punching at a culture war straw man is not giving people that choice very clearly.
She's saying,
yeah.
Right. That's their problem, because Biden is the one that comes off as normal. This is.
Yeah.
Right, and that's why Biden's strength is in some ways his weakness. He's this like centrist all white man, and it's just not going to land. You're just not going to call him a radical wokester, and have it stick.
Yeah.
Didn't Jesse? It was like Jesse Waters or somebody said people just don't hate Joe Biden.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah,
It's true.
It's something good for good for him.
So on the other hand, let's go ahead and put, what is this, B3, guys, that we could put up on the screen here from the Washington Post, where you have the latest post-ABC poll, which had a lot of bad numbers for Joe Biden, says more than 6 in 10 say the president has not accomplished much, despite, they say, the passage of numerous bills, which is true. 62% of Americans say Biden has accomplished not very much or little or nothing during his presidency. Only 36% say he's accomplished a great deal or a good amount. His approval rating is low. We showed a poll earlier that has him losing to Donald Trump. Of course, a lot of polls out there, too, having losing to Ron DeSantis if DeSantis ends up being the nominee. You have a majority of Democrats, Ryan, who say, we don't want this guy to run again. We want someone else. So even as, I listen to that speech, and there's a lot in there that, I respond to. I think it's a good case he makes about what he's done, about what he might do going forward, laying out industrial policy, antitrust, pro-labor, et cetera. But there's a lot of signs the American people aren't really feeling that right now.
Right, the flip side of nobody hating Joe Biden is that nobody really likes him either.
Yeah.
This same
He's
poll,
just kind of
I believe
okay.
He exists.
7% of people who said they were excited about him.
Who's excited
They all
about
work
Joe
at
Biden?
MSNBC.
7%.
Right.
It's
Yes.
the cast of Nicole Wallace's
Yes.
show.
Yes.
That's right.
The low-rated
Yeah.
one, too. Not even the good one.
Yes.
If there is such a thing.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody's excited about him, but that's not how you govern anymore in America, and it's not necessarily how you win elections.
Yeah.
Like Hillary Clinton's problem was she had this small group that was really excited about her, but in general, people weren't excited about her. They thought she was just qualified and most qualified, et cetera. But people intensely disliked her on the other side.
Yeah.
And it became a contest, if you remember in the polling at the very end, of who was the least disliked by the American public. And Biden ended up beating Trump 4 years later because he was less disliked than Trump was disliked.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
With Trump, he has very high favorables and very high unfavorables. Nobody feels ambivalent towards Trump. Whereas with
everyone's ambivalent to Biden.
Everyone is basically ambivalent.
He's like, he's fine.
I mean, Emily, the thing I keep coming back to with Biden and his reelect is, I don't know if you remember Ron Klain after Emmanuel Macron won re-election in France, where his approval rating was total trash, right? It was like in the 30s.
Yes.
And he's able to win, and he won pretty easily over Marine Le Pen because people really hated her a lot. And so, Ron Klain tweets this out and is like, oh, interesting. He won re-election with a 36% approval rating or whatever. I mean, that kind of seems like the path that they are hoping for Biden. And so that's why you see, not only in this speech, he really did front load with what he's done and what he wants to do and where we are, et cetera, on the economy. But there's also quite a bit in there, which obviously Republicans got upset about the Republican plans and why they were the wrong direction. So, I mean, in some ways, I think his reelect hinges on how much people dislike the Republicans, how extreme they are, and how much they want to avoid going in that direction again.
Right, and that's why it totally depends on the nominee. We've seen that show up in polling, but it's a really important point because I think American politics is lurching towards that reality for the foreseeable future period, where you have people with really low approval ratings, maybe even low favorability ratings that are just able to muster the right, cobble together the right coalition and just scrape past or get to that 50% mark or 49, whatever it is. And that's the reality I think we're facing in the country, that we're too divided to have, I think, like Ronald Reagan's re-election, where he's just trouncing absolutely everybody. This is not going to happen. Or Bill Clinton. I mean, we're not in that world anymore. And so Republicans, I think, need to realize that if they want to create this dichotomy of normal versus crazy, they need to figure out how to make that stick to Joe Biden.
They need to not be the
and
crazy.
not be crazy.
Well,
right.
you have to do both.
Don't do the Cruella de Vil thing and stand up and yell.
It's a tough one. I really don't know how they get their way out of it, because it's like I can make the case on either side. Like if I'm Ron DeSantis, look, like, okay, let's say Trump. We had a fun debate at our live show. What happens if Trump and DeSantis both die? But what's more likely? Let's say Trump.
What's wrong with you guys?
It was a fun. Honestly, it was a fun segment. I swear.
Trump and DeSantis thing so many times. We're like,
Right.
all right.
We're like, what if they both? What if they both?
Said they both get arrested.
My scenario was that they were both on Air Force One and Air Force One crashed,
Marshall
like on
had
their
a
way
good
to
one.
Florida.
They blow up the Chinese balloon
Yeah,
over
and then it
Florida,
falls on-
and the debris takes them both out.
No, DeSantis arrested for grooming.
Yeah, Santos.
and then Trump-
Actually, no, George Santos killed them both. Okay, so
Move on.
part of what we got
Too much Diet Coke.
from that, part of what we got from that dialogue was that they need to try and reconcile the craziness of Trump and the energy of that with the fact that they still won 6% of the national popular vote during the midterms. Like, this can be done. Joe Biden is weak. We have all of the polling data to show that. It is Trump and that wing which is dragging them down electorally. However, they hold so much power institutionally. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% true. And
Yeah.
Biden is picking up on this with his own party in a way that Republicans who have seen the culture war sort of path to victory in a Virginia or a Florida, you cannot just translate that to Sarah Huckabee Sanders going all in and having absolutely no answer to Biden's very sort of like normie, aimed square at the middle economic speech. That's like a kitchen table, real person speech. You can't just come out swinging with that kind of stuff. And Biden, for instance, he didn't say much, as you guys pointed out earlier, on abortion. He didn't say much about the border. He didn't say much about LGBTQ issues. He said we had one mention of of transgender young people.
Right.
But the bulk of the speech was on the economy, He didn't even talk about Ukraine that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was at the bottom third.
Yeah, we
I
noted
was
that
shocked
as
by it.
well.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think Democrats have realized, probably picked up on the number from the midterms, which the midterm narrative was one thing, but it is true. Republicans did have a decent night, not nearly what it was projected to be, but they did okay in the popular vote. So if Democrats see that, they do have a lot of culture war problems. There's just no question about it. You did a great podcast this week on Deconstructed where you sort of talked through some of this. They do have those issues, but Republicans can't fight them in a way that handicaps themselves going into those battles.
Biden doesn't give them a lot of ammunition, and I'm not aware of a national election that has ever been won on the question of what local schools should be teaching or not teaching.
That is our destiny, though, to have presidential elections hinge on who gets to play on the lacrosse team. Like that will be like eventually where this system is heading. I don't know if it'll be this one or 4 years from now, but it's part of the process of just removing more and more decision making away from elections. But you still have to give people something to fight over.
Right.
Yeah.
But speaking of not having anything to fight over, it's like the Democratic Party seems like they don't have the civil war that they had over the last kind of 6, 7, 8 years. It was basically won by the establishment, with Biden finally beating Bernie, but they also absorbed a decent amount of what Bernie was fighting for, and so that's why you see so much frustration on the outside that Bernie's not fighting more. That Bernie's become a big supporter of Joe Biden, because Bernie, as budget chairman, writing the reconciliation package. He's seeing trillions of dollars of spending go through. You're seeing unemployment knocked down to what, 3.4%, lowest since like 1969.
Yes.
Right. And so you have this. He talked about the nearly $400 billion in climate spending, and so
he called himself a capitalist.
Yes, right, exactly. So they kind of ended this civil war by A, beating Bernie, but then B, bringing in a decent amount of what he was fighting for, just enough to kind of keep them happy together. And because Democratic voters are so fired up about electability and beating the evil Republicans, they're going to keep putting forward people like Biden, probably. Whereas Republicans still are, fired by the culture war issues, and because I think they were told that Trump was unelectable. They said, screw it, we don't care. We're electing him anyway. We're nominating him anyway. And he won. They don't want to hear about electability crap anymore
I agree.
from people.
And they're not going to want to hear that for a long time. Go ahead, Krystal.
Emily, what do you see as the contours of the coming Republican? I mean, the Republican Civil War is sort of upon us. People are kind of choosing their sides and the battle lines are breaking down. But Are there economic issues that are involved in that Republican civil war? Is it primarily around culture war issues? Clearly, Ron DeSantis is positioning himself as like I was during COVID, I was the guy who was open for business. Donald Trump was shutting things down. Whether the facts of that, whatever, that's how he's positioning himself. Is that going to be the key dividing line? How do you see this playing out?
So it looks like Nikki Haley is going to announce formally and do a rollout next week. And that's already what I've seen some on the kind of new right talking about is like what an embarrassment that this is just a Tea Party ghost who has not updated herself whatsoever. But then the question is, what is the substantial difference between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley? Because with Donald Trump, we know to some extent that it's just a mixed bag. It's the same thing with his foreign policy. You're going to get some new, some shocking new, and some of the old stuff. It depends on who wins the fight at any given moment, the tug of war at any given moment. But how substantially different is Ron DeSantis or Glenn Youngkin, Mr. P.E., Patagonia vest, going to be on that issue? And I think that's a really open question, and the primaries are going to be a place where that's sorted out because Republicans do face pressure now after Donald Trump, this is post-Paul Ryan era, not to do things to Social Security and Medicare. This is a huge source of pressure on Republicans. So I think a lot of it will be hashed out in the midterms. I think it's completely up in the air now. I think anybody who says the Republican Party has been, permanently changed for good and turned into the party of the working class is absolutely wrong. That's not to say there isn't some reason for
possible.
optimism.
Right.
And
yeah,
by the way,
it's like
Stoller talks about this.
Yeah.
Like, this is good for everybody. The Republican Party is never going to be a beautiful, wonderful, pure party of the working class. It's not going to happen. The Democratic Party is not going to be either. One might be better than the other. But the Republican Party at least being dragged, kicking and screaming to say things like, if we're going to balance the budget, we're not going to do it from stealing and raiding from your entitlement funds. That's a good day for everyone. But the question is still open.
I mean, I see that and I don't. Because at the end of the day, the McCarthy holdouts also begged and demanded a vote for the frickin' fair tax, which is,
get rid of the
terrible,
IRS.
terrible, regressive, total Tea Party throwback stuff. And the whole contours of the debt ceiling fight, outside of them just not publicly wanting to be accused of cutting Social Security and Medicare, this is Tea Party 2.0 stuff. I mean, this is all Tea Party tactics. Their asks are Tea Party asks. So it's, when I look at something like that, I'm like, does it really change? Is it really different? Because now that Trump is sort of less clearly in command too, a lot of their talking points and their economic policy has just floated right back to that Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan era, ultimately. And I mean, it's Trump himself, his biggest accomplishment was a gigantic corporate tax cut that they all are perfectly happy with.
Well, and the other thing, and you'll definitely have thoughts on this, but antitrust is a huge, and I'm actually very curious if Sarah Huckabee Sanders had a word about antitrust, because Republicans have actually made significant motions. Some of the most powerful antitrust suits have been filed by people like Ken Paxton in Texas, and the Trump administration against Google. There's some real meat on the bones. That's like one of the areas where there is actually truly a realignment, to borrow a word from Saagar and Marshall, that you can see happening. And who is Ron DeSantis? Is Sarah Huckabee Sanders? Is Nikki Haley? What are they going to say about that? How would they govern? That's a completely.
Well, Nikki Haley is already
we know
on
where
record.
Nikki would be.
She's already on record against what is it?
And she's
now is not
staking her lane out on that.
Now is not the time to rethink capitalism, is what she famously said in her speech. So good luck, Nikki. I'm going to enjoy watching you fail. I really will. I could say that as the Indian American who doesn't want to see you be the first one on the stage for all of us. But Ryan, I'm curious here also on the Democratic side. So at the end of the day, the laundry list of here's what I want and all of this, it's not going to happen. This was all just oppositional. So to that extent, Biden, we were talking about, this is the kickoff of his campaign. It seems like it did a pretty good job. Like, overall, this is probably as good as you could probably hope for. And he didn't step into any of the pitfalls. I saw that he's on his way to Wisconsin and Florida. In Florida, I'd just be like, give up, Mr. President.
Right.
Like, that ship sailed, sir. Yeah. Wisconsin, that's a smart move. But, yeah, like going into those two states in the next couple of days, like, this is probably going to be a pretty high point for him. And especially coming off the midterms.
Right. There were two paths he could have taken when Republicans said we're going to hold the debt ceiling hostage to force demands. He could have taken the last Joe Biden approach, which was great. We all need to get together. We'll do a commission. And
Simpson Bowls.
Simpson Bowls. We'll hold hands together. I got Bruce Reed here. He was my staff guy then. He's still in the White House.
Yeah, that's true. He's still there.
Dust the plans off. And yes, like people want to work longer. And
right.
Medicare is too generous. And Medicaid, people need to be incentivized to get back to work. Like they could have been that Joe Biden,
right?
Or it could be the Joe Biden that we saw tonight, who's like, who baits them with the Rick Scott plan. And he could have baited them with the Kevin McCarthy plan, saying they were going to strengthen Social Security and Medicare. He gets them to call him a liar, and he says, "Oh, wait, we got a lot of converts here. I'm happy. So great. We're not." So he goes the other direction and says, "We're not going to go down that path," which means that the Biden who came out of the gate with the, he said, "Here's my offer on the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion," and Susan Collins comes back. She's like, "Here's our offer, $550 billion or 600, whatever it is." 2 hours later, he puts out a statement. He's like, "We're doing this alone. We're not taking 6 months like Obama did and like allowing Susan Collins to just like dictate this to us." That was a shocking moment in like Democratic political history.
Yeah.
But
when
is
we
it
did
him?
that.
You know how he's been like conferring with John Meacham and trying to step into the FDR shoes, and this is like actually reported. Axios has had reports
you're right.
on
Yeah.
Biden like genuinely trying to rescue the soul of the nation and seeing himself as this FDR figure, not like FDR light, but like FDR next generation, truly. And he had a line in the speech where he talked about, I think it's the Inflation Reduction Act, provisions of it not going into effect until January 1. So people are just starting to feel the economy heating up, and the economy is heating up in different ways. And that might explain the disconnect between the mood of the country in polling and what Biden sees as a hot economy or a heating up economy. But to that point, is it some of that seeing him slotting himself into that character, this FDR-like figure that has made him say, "I'm not the old Joe Biden, screw it, we're not waiting for Susan Collins." But at the same time, he did say Republican friends over and over again in that speech.
Yep.
Notice that?
I mean, this is in particular a real break from the old Joe Biden. Here's the line from the speech. "If anyone tries to cut Social Security, I will stop them. If anyone tries to cut Medicare, I will stop them. I will not allow them to be taken away, not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Now, he doesn't say in there not yesterday because he's tried multiple times in the past.
For 40 years, I tried to cut Social Security. But if you try
it. No, not tomorrow, not ever.
We'll take what we
in
can
the
get,
future.
folks.
Yes. So
God love you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't want to oversell it because, on the other hand, went out of his way to like bust the potential rail strike and hand power to the bosses there. Like, hasn't fought for lifting the minimum wage. Mentioned the PRO Act here, that fell off the table. Didn't really put the screws to Manchin and Sinema over Build Back Better. And so, we were all happy when we got something in the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's easy to forget how much the actual original vision was trimmed by a lack of willingness to play hardball and a willingness to just accept the rulings of the parliamentarian and things like that. So I don't want to oversell it here, but I do think there are some noteworthy shifts in terms of, even just industrial policy and antitrust. These were antitrust. The Obama administration was terrible on antitrust. Terrible. Allowed some of these gigantic mergers to go through that now people are raging about, right? The Ticketmaster being a primary example there. And, so industrial policy was basically a dirty word in both parties for my entire life until now.
Up until literally, I think 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Really, when Biden
you were
put
a
out.
communist.
Yes,
do you remember
exactly.
when Biden put out, what was it? His Made in America plan? I praised it on Rising and here. I was like, hey, listen, that's pretty good. I was like, you could say whatever, I was like, by the way, I was like, Jared, please release the Made in America thing from the National Security Council, which I know that you held up for 2 years and then didn't end up passing for literally no reason. So in a lot of ways for Trump, this is dangerous territory. Biden is taking the two most singular popular things that he did, which was China and it was Made in America. Look at that, the way that he talked about China in the speech. And
Although
then
not
also,
much.
No, he didn't talk about it much, but look, he did not say that, 7 years ago?
Right.
What he was trying to say in that whole switch places with I speak Bidenese, is because I used to watch him whenever he was coherent, and he would always talk about how he was one of those people. He was so pro-engagement with China. He often says this, I'm the only person, I've spent more hours with Xi Jinping than any other Western leader in the world. I've I've sat there and I've talked with him across the table. That was his big selling point.
He was so excited. He even
I know.
his son.
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of business dealings going on. That was side,
the big guy.
all on Air Force Two. Another story for another day, of which we have covered several times. But the point is that he has gone from engagement to confrontation. Clearly, that is, without Trump, that doesn't happen. And he's also now gone completely with Made in America, the full embrace of all of that. I do want to know who he is. He goes, many people don't like when I say this, but we're going to buy American. I'm like, who is saying that?
Right,
like,
exactly.
outside of like JP Morgan CEO, who is saying that? I'm like, I like that. Most people like that.
Larry Summers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Got some flap at the country club.
All right.
One last thought, and then I want to hear you guys' final thoughts as well. But one thing we talked about going into this, which maybe it shouldn't matter, maybe it should matter. I think it's reasonable for people that have concerns about a man who would be 86 by the end of a next term. And so as much as the New York Times was running a story that I know was planted by Biden aides about how he's preparing to overcome his stutter in this speech, sort of trying to set the bar low, that if it doesn't go well, don't be an asshole. It's because he has a stutter. It's not because he's old, guys. Don't say that. But ultimately, he's still Joe Biden at 80 years old. It's still not what he used to be. It wasn't like an incredibly masterful oratory. But Ryan, I think, in terms of what he's capable of, this was a pretty well-delivered speech. And as Emily was saying, being able to do a little give and take with the audience, that's not easy to do. So I think also he did himself some favors in terms of persuading people that this is a man who is still capable of conducting the business of the presidency, and that we're not all going to be left in the hands of Kamala Harris, dear God.
I think we're also starting to all grade him on a curve relative to what we expect from him. Like, I think he has successfully set the bar really low for his public performances. Right. Every time he tried to go off the teleprompter, off script with a little riff, you're almost holding your breath for him.
You tense up.
Yeah, outside of the Medicare thing, they were all bad.
All bad.
Every single one.
Even his start. He starts out by saying, I get to be here because Jill's going to the game tomorrow. And
what are you talking about?
Like, are you talking about the Super Bowl and the Eagles?
It's like, what? That's
He's
Sunday,
very
man.
excited to see how Donovan McNabb performs.
Right.
Yes.
What? Like,
he should have finished with a "Go Birds" at the end.
Yeah.
Because he's not winning Missouri.
That's true.
Dr. Oz, what did Dr. Oz? He's saying "Fly Eagles Fly," right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's good.
Well, on that point, and he did seem to get Tyree Nichols' name wrong. It wasn't
Called him Tyler.
Yeah,
it wasn't great.
Yeah.
Sounded like Tyler. Yeah, it wasn't a perfect performance, but I do think that because the bar is so low for him, every time he clears it and looks like he can give a normal presidential speech for an hour, again, because the bar is so low. And part of that, by the way, is because Donald Trump was the preceding president.
Yep, that's a good point.
And Donald Trump's State of the Unions tended to be pretty boilerplate and conventional. That wasn't true of the rest of his communications. So Joe Biden being able to just give a speech for an hour, talk about his Republican friends, and make America at least sort of be back in the political theater that people are comfortable with, I guess that's a win for him.
Yeah. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much for your analysis. I hope everybody enjoyed this stream. Thank you so much also to our premium members who help support the show and keep all of these things going. They are expensive to put on, so we really much appreciate you. And we love you all. We're going to have some content for you guys tomorrow. Hint, it involves a congressman attacking Krystal Ball, my partner over here, and Joe Rogan as a vicious attack, calling them anti-Semitic. We will get into all of that tomorrow. We'll have a full show for everybody on Thursday. Lots of great content in the interim, and we will see you all later.